Chapter 464. Duke. Muffet, who had finally rushed into the hall, saw the scene in front of him and let out a desperate and mournful cry. But then he took a deep breath and got into a fighting posture. Even though he knew that he was no match for Lucien, he was ready to do his best to fulfill his promise. However, Lucien did not pay any attention to Muffet at all. He picked up the body of the Duke of St. Prospero and rushed out. Muffet was stunned. For a moment, he did not know whether he should be happy or angry. Just when he was about to chase after Lucien, he suddenly heard a slight groaning sound. Marquis. Muffet rushed over and looked at Marquis Vincent, who was lying on the ground in surprise and worry. "You're still alive." Marquis Vincent's mouth was full of blood. He struggled and said weakly, Don't let the Hall family escape." Muffet thought that Marquis Vincent was awakened by the aftermath of the battle, and did not know that the Duke of St. Prospero had been assassinated, so he was still paying attention to the Hall family. "Don't worry. The Hall family can't escape. Please hold on. I'll find a priest to treat you." Muffet did not dare to provoke Marquis Vincent with the news of the Duke of St. Prospero's death. After a few words of comfort, he immediately went out to find a priest. At this time, the manor of the Hall family had quieted down. Most of the guards had gone to chase the group of assassins from the northern frontier, or the members of the Hall family who had escaped. Only a few people were left to guard nearby. "You go to the church immediately." Just when Muffet was about to tell a guard to go to the church and find a priest, he saw a figure appear at the gate of the manor. "Duchess." Muffet hurriedly saluted and then realized that the Duchess was the Archbishop of the Eastern region. With her there was no need to find a priest, so he immediately said, "Madam, Marquis Vincent is now seriously injured and his life is in danger. Please go and see him quickly." The Duchess frowned and said in surprise, "Vincent is still alive?" "Yes." Muffet suddenly felt a little embarrassed. Maybe there was a mistake. "Take me there quickly." The Duchess followed Muffet and asked, "Where's the Duke? Why don't I see him?" Knight Muffet lowered his head and said in shame and pain, "The Duke? I'm afraid he has already been killed." "What?" The Duchess suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her body swayed and she almost fell over. Knight Muffet hurriedly advised, "Madam, please put away your grief for the time being and treat Lord Marquis first. As for your grace, I've already sent men to track down the assassins from the northern frontier. I'll let you know when I have the exact information." "Oh." The Duchess nodded her head shakily. She was still in a daze, but she forced herself to walk into the hall and to Marquis Vincent. "Madam, you can rest assured and treat Lord Marquis injuries. If you need anything, please feel free to ask. I will be waiting outside." "All right." After Knight Muffet left, the Duchess checked on Marquis Vincent's injuries and checked his breathing. Then she revealed a look of surprise. Obviously, she found it hard to believe that her son was still alive after being injured like this. But in the face of her son's serious injuries, the Duchess just looked at him without any intention of treating him. Time passed little by little. The Duchess seemed to be thinking about something, and didn't care that her own son was slowly sliding into the abyss of death beside her. After some time, footsteps sounded again, and the Duchess came out of her thoughts. "Vincent." The Marquise ran in with a panicked expression. When she saw the terrible injuries on her husband's body, her originally pale face instantly became even paler. "Madam Kate." "Vincent, how is he?" The Marquis even forgot to salute and asked in a daze. The Duchess didn't mind her daughter-in-law's lack of manners and said with a worried look, "I've already treated him, but his injuries are too serious. Whether he can wake up or not depends on his will, and whether my lord is willing to take pity on him." The Marquis knelt on the ground and cried and begged, "Please save him." The Duchess helped Molly up and said, "He is my son. How can I not try my best to save him? You can find someone to carry him back first. Be careful not to touch his wounds and don't find anyone to look at him. I will personally treat him later." The Marquis wiped her tears and nodded repeatedly. Okay. After saying a few more things to pay attention to, the Duchess went out. But she didn't notice that after she turned around, Marquis Vincent suddenly opened his eyes and stared at his mother coldly. On the tower of the North City, Knight Roger stared in the direction of the East City. No one knew what he was thinking. One by one, messengers came and went, bringing the latest situation of the battlefield here. The situation in the East City was still worrying, but the vanguard of the Blood Cavalry was not far from the Hall family's manor. It was estimated that it wouldn't be long before good news came from there. However, the situation outside the city was not optimistic. According to the latest news sent back by the sentries, the army of the eastern region outside the city had surrounded White Dew City and was constantly shrinking the encirclement. In fact, Knight Roger was not afraid of the enemy's siege tactics. In the face of the powerful attack of the Blood Cavalry, the encirclement of the eastern region was no different from a leaky cloth bag. However, there was a prerequisite, that is, the Blood Cavalry could set up a formation outside the city and get enough distance to charge and accelerate. If they really let the army of the eastern region outside the city block the city gate, the tragic scene in the Shadow Canyon back then would probably happen again. Therefore, the Blood Cavalry must not be trapped in the city. They must start to break out of the encirclement before the army outside the city tightened the encirclement. The adjutant couldn't help but go forward several times to persuade Knight Roger, but he still looked in the direction of the East City and never gave the order to break out. Time passed bit by bit, and the army outside the city was also getting closer and closer. Just as Knight Roger was about to give the order to break out of the encirclement, a beam of dazzling blue magic signal tore through the dark sky and bloomed over the East City. Knight Roger was overjoyed and immediately gave the order. Sound the horn, gather the army and get ready to break out. Yes. Woo! The low and rhythmic sound of the bugle resounded through the night sky of White Dew City. The Blood Cavalry who were still fighting in the East City immediately woke up, stopped fighting with the enemy, and began to retreat in an orderly manner. Clive wiped the blood stains on his face, pulled the messenger who was passing by and hurriedly said, "We haven't received the people of the Hall family yet. I just saw them running south. Why are they retreating now? I don't know. Execute the military order." Clive sighed and had no choice but to turn his horse around and shout, "That's right. Brothers, let's go back with me." Chapter 465. The night was dark. Count Nicole looked in the direction of White Dew City in the distance, and asked the adjutant beside him, "How long will it take to reach White Dew City?" "My lord, according to our current speed, it will take about 3 hours." The adjutant thought for a while and asked, "Do we need to speed up?" "No." Count Nicole immediately refused. "There are 100,000 Pegasus Legion in White Dew City. They have the geographical advantage and are well prepared. It is impossible for them to be defeated by the Blood Cavalry in such a short time. We don't need to rush. Just stabilize the formation and push forward slowly." Yes. While they were talking, there was a sudden disturbance in the left wing of the army. Count Nicole frowned and ordered, "Stop." The adjutant carefully reminded him, "My lord, it seems that a small unit of the Blood Cavalry is harassing us, intending to slow down our marching speed." "I know." Count Nicole nodded. "Send someone to check the situation, just in case." "Yes." The adjutant was a little helpless. He actually wanted to hint Count Nicole not to be slowed down by the Blood Cavalry, but he did not expect, however, the adjutant could understand Count Nicole's mentality. This time, the Duke of St. Prospero issued a conscription order, asking the lords to lead the army to surround White Dew City and block the retreat of the Blood Cavalry. Although the lords did as they were told, they all had their own thoughts. For example, Count Nicole actually knew that the Blood Cavalry kept sending small units to harass them in order to slow down the speed of the allied forces of the lords. But Count Nicole deliberately pretended to be stupid and dawdled outside the city. The reason was very simple. He did not want his army to face the terrible Blood Cavalry. The news that the Fire Velvet Army was completely wiped out by the 3,000 Blood Cavalry had spread to the south of the Alsace Mountains. When Count Nicole first received the news, he was absolutely unwilling to believe it. But as the news was confirmed, Count Nicole had the idea that the Blood Cavalry was invincible. The other lords who accepted the conscription order of the Duke of St. Prospero were the same. The fiasco of the Fire Velvet Army completely destroyed their confidence. If 3,000 bloody cavalry were so terrifying, Then what about the main force of the bloody cavalry in the White Dew City? Therefore, the lords of the eastern region hoped that the Sky Horse Legion, and even the people of the eastern region in the White Dew City would consume the strength of the Blood Cavalry. When the Blood Cavalry lost its spirit, they would lead their own troops to surround them and see if they could get some military exploits. As for whether this would cause heavy damage to Sky Horse Legion, plunge the people of White Dew City into misery and suffering, or even allow Blood Cavalry to find a chance to escape, Count Nickel and the other lords of the eastern region didn't care. What they cared more about was their own family's army. That was their foundation. The Duke of St. Prospero had already expected this, so he made a promise to the lords who came to support him. For example, the Duke of St. Prospero had promised him that if he could wipe out the main force of the bloody cavalry in this battle, the Nickel family would be promoted one level higher. If he were to go up from Count, he would be Marquis. Generally speaking, the four dukes rarely conferred the title of Marquis, except for the title of their first successor. After all, the territory required to confer a Marquis was too large. The dukes were reluctant to let their vassals control such a huge force. That was to say, Garcia, who came from the house of St. Hilda and had made countless military exploits, could be conferred the title of Marquis. Count Nickel never thought that one day he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Marquis Garcia. But even such a temptation could not offset his fear of the bloody cavalry. In fact, if the Duke of St. Prospero could appoint a person with enough trust and prestige to be the supervisor, these lords would not dawdle like this. But the problem was that the Duke of St. Prospero could not send anyone else. He certainly could not leave the White Dew City. As for his eldest son Marquis Vincent, he did not fully trust him at that time. His second son, the Earl of Avon, was not around, and even his youngest daughter Anna was nowhere to be found. The others were not qualified to control the situation. In desperation, the Duke of St. Prospero could only appoint Count Nickel as the temporary commander-in-chief of this coalition of lords. But judging from the current situation, he seemed to have overestimated Count Nickel's courage. Moreover, he misjudged the real target of the bloody cavalry to attack the White Dew City. It was not the Hall family, but himself. The glimmer of dawn slowly revealed from the east, gently but firmly tearing apart the dark night. Count Nickel woke up from his doze. He rubbed his eyes and patted his back. The old count, who was over 60 years old, suddenly felt that he could no longer adapt to the military life. In fact, if the promise given by the Duke of St. Prospero was not too tempting, Count Nickel was not prepared to lead the army himself. Just as he stretched his body, suddenly, the earth seemed to shake. Countless endless rumbles came from afar, like the explosion of spring thunder, but also like the surging waves. Count Nickel's face changed and he immediately shouted, "All troops stop advancing. Get into formation and prepare to meet the enemy." As soon as the order was passed down, Count Nickel saw countless black shadows suddenly appear on the horizon, filling the whole earth without a trace of a gap. Even the rising sun was covered by this black tide. For a time, the weather changed. Count Nickel only felt that his heart was tightly grasped by a big hand, and he could not breathe at all. Was this the bloody cavalry? Shield up. Spear up. Archers, get ready. Because the marching speed was not fast, and they were already mentally prepared, the response speed of the coalition of lords was very fast. But even if they had a complete defensive formation, they could not help but feel afraid in the face of the surging bloody cavalry at this moment. Nearly 20,000 elite cavalries launched a group charge. Such a scene could never be imagined by those who had not experienced it personally. The impact, the oppression, was enough to make anyone tremble in fear. In the face of a large number of the coalition of lords, the bloody cavalry did not choose to do any probing. Instead, it was a simple group charge. Because Knight Roger had absolute confidence. This night, in fact, the bloody cavalry kept monitoring the coalition of lords outside the city, and constantly sent small troops to harass them. So the probing was already in progress. Moreover, the result of the feedback made Knight Roger somewhat disappointed. That's it. Even if he had expected the weakness of the Eastern Army, he did not expect it to be so weak. Moreover, Knight Roger could see at a glance that these lords did not have the courage to fight to the death with the bloody cavalry. Therefore, in the face of such an enemy, Knight Roger decisively chose the most direct and violent way of attack. Go forward. The surging cavalry was like a sharp arrow leaving the bowstring. With an unstoppable momentum, they rushed into the army of the Eastern Territories' allied forces. Like a red-hot knife inserted into butter, the seemingly neat infantry formation was, in fact, vulnerable. In an instant, a ferocious gap was torn open. Countless stunned Eastern soldiers cried and crawled, trying to escape from the devil army in front of them, which seemed to have climbed up from hell. They were not at the same level at all. They could not fight at all. The gap was getting bigger and bigger, deeper and deeper, and soon it became a passage through the whole army. After breaking through the coalition army, the bloody cavalry did not mean to stay and went straight to the north. All that was left was a mess of the Eastern Allied forces, and a group of Eastern lords who were completely scared out of their wits. Chapter 466. The first rays of the morning sun slowly penetrated the clouds and reflected the golden light on the land. Unknown weeds stretched their bodies under the morning sun, greedily absorbing the blood on the battlefield that had not yet solidified. A group of vultures hovered in the air. They were never absent death revelers. They flew down from time to grab a piece of rotten meat, but were immediately driven away by the soldiers of the eastern region who were cleaning the battlefield. Count Nichols sat on his warhorse in a daze. The strong smell of blood that wafted over from time to time made him feel nauseous. The piles of corpses on the battlefield almost made the old count faint. Count Nicole was not injured in this battle, except that he was frightened and ran around, causing his helmet to fall off. However, even though he was completely unharmed, the old count seemed to have lost his backbone. His stooped back and grizzled hair made him look as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. This encounter came suddenly, and it ended very quickly as well. The bloody cavalry gave a fatal blow to the Eastern Region Lord's coalition army, and then left. In fact, the coalition army had been completely stunned at that time. If the bloody cavalry had turned around and charged back and forth a few more times, this huge and bloated coalition army would have immediately fallen apart. If the bloody cavalry had taken advantage of the victory to attack again, few people here would have been able to escape. Although the White Dew City was right in front of them, if the coalition army collapsed, even if the defeated soldiers fled to the White Dew City, the people in the city would not dare to open the gate to receive them. Fortunately, the bloody cavalry did not mean to kill them all. Count Nicole did not think that the other side was being merciful, or that it was beyond their power, but more like, it was unnecessary. It was as if a giant had slapped a few flies to death, and the rest of the flies flew around in fear. But the giant would not chase after the flies to kill them one by one. Of course, if the flies came to seek death again, the giant would certainly not spare them. Understanding this, a strong sense of shame and humiliation surged in his heart, and Count Nicole's old face turned red. Everyone knew that the Eastern Region army was very weak, but no one thought that the gap between them and the northern frontier was so big. Once upon a time, Count Nicole had been extremely fortunate to have the Raging Water River as a natural barrier in the eastern region. But now he suddenly felt that the Raging Water River was not a barrier to the eastern region, but more like a cage. It locked the Easterners in this greenhouse, but when the Real storm came, the flowers in the greenhouse would only be ruthlessly destroyed. As for the northern frontier, although the threat of the trolls was a great hindrance to the northern frontier, it also helped the northern frontier to forge a terrifying and invincible cavalry. Just over 20,000 bloody cavalry soldiers could turn the eastern region upside down. Count Nicole suddenly felt confused. Where was the future of the eastern region? Your lordship. While he was deep in thought, the adjutant walked over with Count Nicole's lost helmet in his hand. Count Nicole sighed and took his helmet, but did not put it on. He asked in a low voice, "How are the casualties?" The statistics haven't been completed yet, but according to preliminary estimates, I'm afraid that nearly 30,000 people have died in the attack of the bloody cavalry. The corners of Count Nicole's mouth twitched, and his heart was bleeding. He also knew that in fact, the casualties caused by only one wave of the bloody cavalry's attack could not be so great. More people were probably trampled to death when they were running for their lives, and many people should have become deserters out of fear, so they were recorded in the death toll. Seeing that Count Nickel was silent for a long time, the adjutant reminded him in a low voice, "Your lordship, we'd better enter the city as soon as possible, in case the bloody cavalry comes back." Count Nickel woke up from his dream and said, "Yes, yes, yes. Gather the army immediately and march to White Dew City." Yes. Under this order, the allied lords responded extremely quickly. Even if the battlefield had not been cleaned up, they had no time to care about it. Everyone wanted to enter the city immediately and never meet the bloody cavalry in the wild battlefield in their lives. "Your lordship, this way please." Count Nickel followed the butler to the inner court of White Dew Castle. He lowered his head and thought about how to explain to the Duke of St. Prospero, when he met him later. While he was deep in thought, Count Nickel did not notice the oppressive atmosphere in the castle. In front of the Duke's study, Count Nickel adjusted his collar and gently knocked on the wooden door. "Come in." Hearing the voice of the Duchess, Count Nickel did not care. He immediately pushed the door open and entered. There were 2 people in the study. Except for the Duchess, the other person was not the Duke of St. Prospero as Count Nickel thought, but St. Prospero Ivan. Count Nickel was a little confused, but he still saluted and greeted him. Even though Ivan did not have a noble title, and was only a knight from a side branch of the St. Pros family, Count Nickel still treated him with respect. Because Ivan's brother, Imogen St. Prospero, was the consul of the Eastern region in the Senate. Therefore, although Knight Ivan's strength was mediocre and his prestige was ordinary, he was still a very important figure in the St. Pros family. The Duchess motioned for Count Nickel to take a seat, and then asked, "Count Nickel, what's the situation outside the city?" Count Nickel looked embarrassed, but he had no choice but to give a brief account of the situation outside the city. Of course, in the process, he inevitably avoided the important points and found some excuses for himself. But no matter how he glossed over it, he could not change the established fact that the bloody cavalry broke through the military formation of the allied lords and successfully broke through the siege. The Duchess quietly listened to Count Nickel's account, but she did not blame him. Instead, she helped to explain. "Count Nickel, it's not your fault. No one thought that the bloody cavalry would choose to withdraw so decisively. Under the circumstances, no one could stop the bloody cavalry who wanted to break through the siege." "Thank you for your understanding." Count Nickel breathed a sigh of relief, but then he asked, "Duke, where are you now?" "This time, no matter what reason I have lost the battle, so I want to ask for your forgiveness face to face." As soon as he said this, the room suddenly became quiet. The Duchess's face was full of deep sorrow. Knight Ivan also lowered his head, as if he was silently mourning. Count Nickel blinked his eyes in confusion, thinking that he had said something wrong. But then he heard a shocking piece of news from the Duchess. "Count Nickel, the Duke of St. Prospero was assassinated in Hall Manor. I'm afraid he's dead." What? Count Nickel opened his mouth wide and did not recover for a long time. But then he immediately asked, "From what you mean, it's still not certain whether the Duke has been killed?" According to Knight Muffet, who was present at the time, the Duke was pierced through the right chest by a spear, and then stabbed in the heart by a dagger. But because the Duke was taken away by the northern frontier, it's not certain whether he's dead or alive. But the Duchess covered her mouth, as if she could not control her pain. Count Nickel's mind was in a mess, as if the sky had collapsed. At this time Knight Ivan said, "Duchess, Count Nickel, now is not the time to grieve. Although the bloody cavalry has retreated for the time being, who knows if they will come back? The most urgent thing is to choose a successor to the Duke, let him preside over the overall situation, and stabilize the people." "You're right." The Duchess took a deep breath and tried to calm down. Then she turned to look at Count Nickel and asked, "Count Nickel, who do you think is more suitable to inherit the position of Duke of the Eastern region?" Chapter 467. Hearing the Duchess's question, Count Nickel subconsciously became alert. As an old man who had been in politics for many years, Count Nickel certainly knew that the struggle for succession was often the most tragic and bloody. Especially in the Eastern region, in the House of St. Prospero, the struggle for succession had been going on for a long time. It could even be said that the current terrible situation in the eastern region was largely caused by the struggle for succession. To be honest, Count Nickel had never wanted to get involved in this mess. He was old, and his style had gradually become more conservative. He was no longer willing to do things that were highly profitable but riskier. Furthermore, the lessons learned from the Hall family and the Bruggins family had strengthened Count Nickel's resolve to stay out of this matter. Duchess, regarding the succession of the Duke of the Eastern region, I really have no right to comment. But the Duchess obviously did not intend to let Count Nickel get away with it so easily. She looked up at him and said in a low voice, "Count Nickel, the Eastern region is now in danger. As one of the few remaining loyal vassals of the House of St. Prospero, do you intend to stay out of it?" These words made Count Nickel fall into deep thought. He heard the threat in the Duchess's words, but he also heard the intention to rope him in. At this moment he suddenly realized that of the 3 earls of the Eastern region, Count Bruggen had died in battle, and Count Hall could not be trusted. Then, it seemed that Count Nickel was really the only one left in the House of St. Prospero that could be relied on. Count Nickel's cloudy eyes swept over the Duchess and Knight Ivan in front of him. He seemed to understand something, and he could not help but have a certain idea in his mind. But out of his cautious nature, Count Nickel still asked tentatively, "Duchess, what do you think about the succession?" He thought that the Duchess would avoid this question. Even if she had a plan, she would only give a hint. But unexpectedly, she said bluntly, "My husband conferred Vincent as the Marquis of the Eastern region when he was alive. Presumably, in his mind, this is the first successor. So I am willing to respect his will." Count Nickel looked at the Duchess in surprise. Obviously, he did not expect her to give such an answer. Of course, Count Nickel knew about the succession of the Eastern region, and he also knew that it was the Duchess who had first suggested that the Duke of St. Prospero make his second son, Evan, the first successor. Why did she change her mind now? Count Nickel suddenly realized something and asked, "Bloody cavalry attacked White Dew City this time. Did they take away the members of the Hall family in the city?" "No." Knight Ivan shook his head. Under the desperate resistance of Marquis Vincent and Duke St. Pros, the bloody cavalry returned empty-handed. "That's good." Count Nickel breathed a sigh of relief. He finally understood why the Duchess had changed her mind. As long as the Hall family was still in White Dew City, letting Marquis Vincent inherit the position of Duke of the Eastern region was indeed the wisest choice. With his relationship with the Hall family, it wasn't difficult to change Earl Hall's mind. As long as the New Shui River was still in the hands of the House of St. Prospero, the Eastern region could be relieved. Although the Earl of Avon was engaged to the daughter of the Bruggen family, the Fire Velvet Army had been wiped out. The Bruggen family's opinion naturally did not matter. As for the Nickel family, they had benefited from Count Nickel's caution, and had never really taken sides between the 2 successors. Therefore, no matter who became the Duke of the Eastern region, the Nickel family would not be adversely affected. But just as Count Nickel was about to nod in agreement, Knight Ivan suddenly reminded him, "Duchess, of course I will not question the succession of Marquis Vincent, but in his current condition, can he really succeed the title of Duke?" Count Nickel was shocked and quickly asked, "What happened to the Marquis?" Knight Ivan sighed and said, "In order to prevent the northern frontier from taking away the Hall family, Marquis Vincent fought bravely. Unfortunately, he was seriously injured and his life is in danger." It was only then that Count Nickel realized that what Knight Ivan had said about fighting to the death was not just an exaggeration. The Duke of St. Prospero died in battle, and Marquis Vincent was seriously injured and on the verge of death. For the sake of the Hall family, the House of St. Prospero, the price was too high. Previously, when the Duke of St. Prospero issued the conscription order, he had told Count Nickel that he was prepared to use the Hall family as bait to lure the bloody cavalry into the city. Then he would cooperate from the inside and the outside to kill them in White Dew City. But now it seemed that the Hall family was more like a bait thrown by the northern frontier. The targets were the Duke of St. Prospero and Marquis Vincent. The people of the northern frontier could not be so cunning, right? Count Nickel tried hard to shake this thought out of his mind, but he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. He suddenly felt a sense of fear towards the guardian of the northern frontier, Count Angeli, whom he had never met before. Duchess, since you propose to let Marquis Vincent inherit the position of the Duke of the Eastern region, you must have the confidence to save his life, right? Faced with Count Nickel's question, the Duchess did not give an answer. She only lowered her head and her shoulders shook slightly, as if she was sobbing. Count Nickel was silent, but he was more puzzled. Since the Duchess, who was the Archbishop of the Eastern region, did not have the confidence to save Marquis Vincent, then why did she propose to let a dying person inherit the position of the Duke? Even if the Earl of Avon's actions in Alfalfa City and Tinder City were disappointing, there was still Miss Anna. Could it be that in order to win over Count Hall, the House of St. Prospero was willing to do anything? After a long time, the Duchess finally put away her grief and said in a deep voice, "Letting Vincent inherit the position of the Duke is my husband's last wish, and also the most legal choice. As for your worries, even if the worst happens, there is still Eckhart." Eckhart. Count Nickel muttered the name, and finally understood the Duchess's plan. The person she really wanted to be the Duke's successor was not Marquis Vincent on the surface, but the Marquis' son, Eckhart. Logically speaking, Eckhart's line of succession was after the Earl of Avon and Miss Anna. But if Marquis Vincent inherited the position of the Duke first, then his only son, Eckhart, would automatically be the first in line to be the next Duke of the Eastern region. But Eckhart was only 3 years old. Count Nickel was well aware of the Duchess's intention of pushing a 3-year-old child to the position of the Duke. "I agree." Knight Ivan seemed to have understood something and immediately echoed. Then the two of them turned their gazes to Count Nickel. Count Nickel knew that he had no choice. The Duchess represented the will of the Church, and Knight Ivan could influence the Senate. As for the lords of the Eastern region, the Hall family would definitely not oppose letting Eckhart inherit the position of the Duke. The Bruggen family no longer had much say after losing the Tinder army. So, as long as the Nickel family agreed, the remaining lords would naturally not dare to have any other thoughts. In this way, the situation in the Eastern region could be stabilized again. But from then on, would the House of St. Prospero be in control of the Eastern region, or? Count Nickel, what do you think? Hearing the Duchess urging, Count Nickel could only sigh inwardly and say, "I also agree." Chapter 468. As the night fell, smoke gradually rose from the camp in the wild. It was already winter, but the towering Alxis Mountains blocked the cold current from the north, so there would be no extreme cold in the southern part of the eastern region in winter. Especially for the blood cavalry who came from the northern frontier, and had been galloping on the sky ice field all year round. This cold was nothing. They didn't raise the bonfire for warmth, but to cook food and drive away mosquitoes and wild beasts. "Teacher, the main force of the blood cavalry should have arrived at White Dew City by now, right?" Next to the bonfire, Prince Harrison fiddled with the dry wood as he asked Colin, who was beside him. Colin had just finished gnawing a deer leg. He threw the deer leg bone into the bonfire and nodded. "Yes." "Teacher, do you think they can successfully break into White Dew City?" "They should be able to." Prince Harrison blinked, as if he thought Colin was a little too confident. After all, although the blood cavalry was almost invincible in the field, they couldn't escape the limitation of cavalry. Facing a strong city like White Dew City, they might not be able to smoothly take it. However, because he had seen Colin create miracles time and time again, Prince Harrison could only suppress this doubt in his heart. At this time, Princess Judy interrupted. "Teacher, if they really break into White Dew City, what are you going to do?" Colin smiled and said, "What do you think I should do?" The little girl tilted her head and said, "I think you can ask the House of St. Prospero to pay a large sum of war reparations." Colin shook his head. "If it's just reparations, isn't it too good for the House of St. Prospero? Then you can ask the Eastern region to send a large number of slaves to the northern frontier to work for you." Seeing that Colin was still smiling without saying anything, Prince Harrison also suggested, "You can also ask the Eastern region to cede some territory." Hearing this, Colin touched his chin and showed an interested look, but still said, "It's still too good for the House of St. Prospero." Princess Judy pouted. "You can't really occupy the Eastern region, right? You are not a descendant of the Paladin family, so you can't be the lord of the Eastern region. Who made this rule? Colin suddenly asked curiously. The first-generation Holy Knights. Princess Judy immediately said. Prince Harrison nodded and added, when the Empire of Light was established, the first generation of Holy Knights had signed a holy covenant. It clearly stated that only the descendants of the Holy Knight family could be conferred the title of Duke. Colin searched through the memories of his predecessor and found that this ignorant and incompetent fellow had never read the sacred covenant. He decided to look for it himself when he had the time. After thinking about it for a moment, Colin asked again, if Vera gives birth to my son, will he become the Duke of the Eastern region? No, the two little ones said in unison. Why? Colin asked curiously. Aren't Vera and my children considered as descendants of the Paladin family? Not really. Colin's interest was piqued. However, before he could ask, Prince Harrison explained, that's not the case. Teacher, the descendants of the Paladin family are different from the descendants of ordinary nobles. The father must be a member of the Paladin family to be considered as a descendant of the Paladin family. For example, your sister Caitlin, if she gives birth to a child for Earl Oman, the child will of course be considered as a descendant of the Oman family, but at the same time, he can also be considered as a descendant of the Angeli family. If the Angeli family has no descendants, he can also inherit the title of the Angeli family. However, the Paladin family is different. Unless the child's father is from the Paladin family, otherwise, he will not be considered as a descendant of the Paladin family. Colin's eyebrows furrowed as he realized something. So Vera and my child can only have Angeli as their surname? Yes. Prince Harrison nodded and added, however, you can choose a child from the descendants of the House of St. Hilda to be your adopted son, and let him inherit Cousin Vera's title. Is this also the content of the Holy Alliance? Colin asked. No. This is a tacit unspoken rule of the Paladin family. When you and Cousin Vera have children, the House of St. Hilda will naturally remind you. Colin rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought again. He suddenly felt that this tacit unspoken rule of the Paladin family might be the real secret of the Paladin family. According to this rule, the inheritance of the Paladin family was actually a paternal inheritance. It had nothing to do with the mother. Therefore, for so many years, the number of Paladin family in the Empire of Light had only decreased and never increased. Those ordinary nobles who wanted to improve their family's bloodline by marrying the daughters of the Paladin family, such as the golden-tailed butterfly Morrison family in the northern frontier, were probably just drawing water with a bamboo basket. This also explained why Emperor Reinhardt, who had a bunch of illegitimate children, had to keep his pregnant lovers in captivity until they gave birth to children. It seemed that this was to prevent the bloodline of the San Lorenzo family from being leaked out through these illegitimate children. However, if the Paladin family was really a paternal inheritance, then one thing did not make sense: the existence of female paladins. From the perspective of genetics, the genetic difference between men and women only existed on the sex chromosome. Women were XX and men were XY. According to the previous inference, the genes of the Paladin family must be on the Y chromosome, which was unique to men. In this way, the female descendants of the Paladin family who lacked the Y chromosome would not be able to inherit the Paladin family's bloodline, but they should also not be able to step into the holy domain. However, the fact was that although female paladins were extremely rare, they still existed. For example, one of the only two paladins in the Empire of Light, the Lord of the Western region, the Duke of St. Gerrian, was a female paladin. After struggling for a long time, Colin suddenly laughed to himself. This was an unscientific supernatural world, and he was still trying to explain everything with science. It was a bit ridiculous. However, Colin did not think that the genetics he had mastered in his previous life was worthless. After all, the humans in this world were not much different from the humans in his previous life. Even if there was a problem with the inference just now, it should only be a deviation in a small aspect. As long as he could find the source of this deviation, he might be able to crack the secret of the Paladin family's bloodline inheritance. Just as Colin was letting his imagination run wild, A servant came over and reported, "My lord, a messenger claiming to be from Skylark City requests an audience." Skylark City? Colin recalled the map of the eastern region that he had studied before. "Is that the territory of the Fines?" "Yes, my lord." The sentry nodded. "Do you want to see this messenger? Bring him here." After a while, a middle-aged knight in armor came over. "Honorable guardian of the northern frontier, Count Angeli, my name is Robert Fines. On behalf of the Fines, I sincerely invite you to Skylark City as a guest." Colin looked at the knight in front of him with a playful expression and said, "Knight Robert, you should know that the Fines Viscounts are currently being imprisoned in Silvermoon City by Queen Aisha, right?" "Yes. Therefore, the Fines invited you to Skylark City this time to discuss the conditions of ransoming the Fines Viscounts with you." Colin thought for a while and said, "How about this? I will wait 3 kilometers outside of Skylark City. Go back and ask your family's manager to come out and meet me." "My lord, the Fines would like to host you and treat you well. At the same time, we would like to clear up some misunderstandings between us." "Don't say any more. I will not enter the city." "My lord, are you worried that?" "Yes, I am worried that you will assassinate me," Colin said with a straight face. Knight Robert was speechless. Chapter 469. Knight Robert was embarrassed. He was used to the way nobles communicated with each other politely even if they wanted to strangle each other to death. Therefore, he did not know how to respond to Colin's straightforwardness. Colin obviously did not care about the feelings of a knight from the east. He immediately waved his hand and said, "Well, you can bring my request back to Skylark City. If the Fines feel that it is not suitable, then there is no need to see them." "All right, Count Angeli. I'll pass on your message." Knight Robert bowed and left the room. After he left, Colin called the messenger and said, "Tomorrow stop outside Skylark City." "Yes. Master, are we really not going to Skylark City?" Princess Judy suddenly asked. "Why? You want to go to Skylark City?" "Yes." Princess Judy opened her eyes wide and nodded. "I heard from my mother that it is a city full of singing skylarks. It is so fun." Colin smiled and shook his head. "But even if you go to the city now, you will not see any singing skylarks." "Why?" "Because skylarks sing to seek a mate. It is winter now, not breeding season." "I see." The light in Princess Judy's eyes instantly dimmed, and she lowered her head in disappointment. Colin touched the girl's hair to comfort her. At the same time, he suddenly thought that skylarks seemed to be a migratory bird. Then when winter came, where would they migrate to? Would it be further east, the Shining Moon Forest? Although they had already left the Alsace Mountains, they still had to pass through a hilly area. The war horses could not gallop, so the speed of the march was naturally not fast. Colin asked the guide and learned that they should be able to reach Skylark City before dark. This kind of long-distance march was very boring. And because it was winter, everything was bleak and the beasts were extinct. There was not even a scenery to see. Princess Judy was bored and began to pester Colin to tell her stories. Colin had no choice but to think of a story to use to entertain the little girl. However, Colin did not care about whether it was not suitable for children, and began to choose a historical story. Today I will tell you the story of Jingku assassinating the king of Qin. Jingku? Qinwang? What a strange name. Do you want to hear it? Yes, I'm listening. Speaking of which, in the Far East, Colin suddenly paused. He raised his head and saw a huge arrow drawing a ferocious arc in the air, heading straight for him. Assassin! Protect the Count! Get out of the way! Colin reached out with his left and right hands, grabbing Prince Harrison and Princess Judy in each hand. Then he quickly jumped off the warhorse. Boom! A wave of hot air surged over, and Colin hurriedly protected the 2 little guys in his arms. At the same time, he was bewildered. How could it explode? When he turned around, he saw a patch of green flames burning crazily at his original position. In an instant, his warhorse was completely devoured. Wildfire. Colin immediately recognized the item that had left a deep impression on him. Count, are you all right? A group of guards swarmed over and immediately used their own bodies to surround Colin, forming 3 layers on the inside and 3 layers on the outside. Colin couldn't hide his anger and immediately ordered, "The enemy is nearby, find them." Yes. While speaking, a series of buzzing sounds came from the air again. Colin raised his head and saw several huge arrows shooting straight at him. This time, he saw clearly that those arrows were obviously shot by the ballistae used to defend the city, and there were several clay pots hanging on the tails of the arrows. Without thinking, he knew that there must be wildfire in them. "They are there." Colin pointed at a hill not far away, while pulling out his sword and throwing it at the nearest arrow. Boom! The arrow was smashed in the air, and the wildfire exploded like fireworks in front of Colin. At this moment, the bloody cavalry immediately took action. The fastest armored man had already stuck to the cliff like a spider, and was quickly climbing up. The rest were divided into 3 groups. One group stayed to protect Colin, Prince Harrison and Princess Judy. Another group surrounded the hill where the assassins were, and the last group of professionals rushed up the hill. "Sir Robert, let's retreat." "Retreat my ass!" Knight Robert shouted while fiddling with the ballistae. "It's the bloody cavalry down there. We can't escape. The only thing we can do now is to kill Colin Angeli before we die." As soon as Knight Robert finished his words, he heard a scream. When he turned around, he saw one of the soldiers beside him clutching his neck. Knight Robert was about to ask, but he saw the soldier's head slide down. This horrifying scene sent chills down everyone's spines. Before they could recover from their shock, they saw an armored man climb out of the cliff in a strange posture. After landing on the ground, the armored man rushed forward without hesitation. And right after him, more people from the northern frontier climbed out of the cliff. Knight Robert saw this and roared. He pulled out his long sword and rushed forward. Clang! Clang! With only 2 strikes, Knight Robert's hand was cut off by the armored man. The gap was too big. Knight Robert endured the severe pain, and rolled back awkwardly to avoid the attack of the armored man. The armored man didn't seem to care about Knight Robert. Instead, he rushed straight to the 5 ballistae on the hill. Crack! 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 The 5 ballistae were all destroyed in a burst of wood chips. At this moment, the people from the eastern frontier knew that they had lost, so they hurriedly ran down the hill. However, the bloody cavalry soldiers at the foot of the hill had also rushed up. Unable to advance or retreat, the people from the eastern frontier had to launch a desperate attack on the armored men under the leadership of Knight Robert. But how could they be a match for these blood thralls? They were quickly cleaned up as if they were vegetables. Only Knight Robert was still alive, and he was kept alive for interrogation. "Knight Robert, is this the hospitality that the Fines prepared for me?" "Bah." Knight Robert was covered in blood, but he still spat at Colin with a ferocious expression. "Colin Angelo, you slaughtered my soldiers from the eastern frontier and imprisoned the Viscounts of Fines. I only hate myself for being incompetent and not being able to kill you. However, this has nothing to do with the Fines. It was just my idea. Nothing to do with it." Colin sneered and pointed at the remains of the ballistae that were moved down from the mountain. "Don't tell me that you stole these ballistae too? That's right. Do you take me for a fool?" Colin completely lost interest in him. He waved his hand at the attendant and said, "Kill them. Collect their heads later, and pile them up outside Skylark City." "Yes." Chapter 470. The setting sun was slowly approaching the horizon, but its afterglow was still lingering on this piece of land. Skylark City, whose city gates were tightly shut, looked particularly desolate under the dim light of the sunset. Especially the hundreds of bloody heads piled up outside the North City gate, which made the whistling north wind seem to have become the sorrowful cries of vengeful spirits. Colin rode on horseback and looked at Skylark City not far away. His eyes flashed with a dangerous light. The hospitality of the Fines family not long ago made him feel lingering fear and anger. However, he still had his rationality and would not order an attack on the city in a fit of anger. It was not a wise choice for cavalry to attack the city. What's more, he only had 3,000 cavalry in his hands. Previously, Colin had attacked Linshui City and Tinder City, by deceiving them to open the city gates, or by launching sneak attacks to catch the other party off guard. He did not really attack them. He would not be stupid enough to let the precious blood cavalry attack a strong city. Although he would not attack the city, Colin had already remembered this debt in his heart. In the future, he would naturally settle it with the Fiennes family. Just as Colin was about to lead his army to withdraw and stop entangling with the Fiennes family, the city gates of Skylark City opened. Colin immediately narrowed his eyes and stared carefully in the direction of the city gates. He was surprised and doubtful. The Fiennes family was not stupid enough to want to go out of the city to fight, right? If that was the case, then Colin was willing to let these stupid and ignorant people of the eastern region understand what a real invincible army was. The soldiers of the bloody cavalry around Colin also took action. They set up a battle array to prevent the eastern region people from rushing out from the other side. Of course, they were not too nervous. After all, as cavalry who came and went like the wind, if they really wanted to leave, the people of the eastern region would not be able to stop them. Under their gazes, a man and a horse slowly walked out of the open city gates. It did not seem like they were preparing to fight. When the person slowly approached, Colin was surprised to find that it was a woman on the horse. If she was 10 or 20 years younger, she would definitely be a woman of unparalleled beauty. But now, the ruthless years had left traces of vicissitudes on her face. Moreover, she didn't seem to care about her appearance. She didn't put on any makeup, and her wheat-colored skin showed that she wasn't a noble lady who lived in a boudoir. Judging from her steady riding posture, her awe-inspiring gaze, and the imposing aura emanating from her every movement, one could tell that she was a female knight who had been on the battlefield. But at this moment, she was not wearing any armor, nor was she holding any weapon in her hand. She was only holding the head. As if she had just been beheaded, blood was still dripping from her head, forming a bloody trail behind the woman. Let her come. Colin ordered the guards who tried to stop them. The guards had no choice but to make way for him. The woman approached slowly, and did not show any fear in the face of the bloody cavalry soldiers who were staring at her covetously. Colin looked at the valiant female knight and said with a smile, "What? Are there no more men in the Fiennes family?" The female knight came in front of Colin and bowed in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Then she pointed at the pile of skulls not far away and replied with a smile, "That's right. Aren't all the real men of the Fiennes family there?" Colin smiled slightly and felt that this woman was a bit interesting, so he asked again, "Since you dare to come to me alone, why don't you introduce yourself?" "My name is Beatrice. I'm the mother of the Fiennes Viscounts. Lady Beatrice. I prefer to be called Knight Beatrice." Colin smiled and felt that this woman was more and more interesting. He pointed at the head in her hand and asked, "Well, Knight Beatrice, what do you mean by holding this head?" Beatrice raised the bloody head in her hand and showed it to Colin. At the same time, she said, "Dear guardian of the northern frontier, Your Excellency Count Angeli, on behalf of the Fiennes family, I would like to express my great regret and apology for the assassination you suffered before. The owner of this head is the mastermind behind this assassination. I hope it can calm your anger." Colin looked carefully at the head in the woman's hand. It was also a woman, younger and more beautiful. "Who is she?" Colin asked with interest. "She is the wife of the Fiennes Viscounts." "Hee. Why did she send someone to assassinate me? To avenge her husband?" Colin smiled coldly. "No." The woman shook her head. "She is just a lunatic who wants to get rid of you at all costs." "Oh, lunatic?" Colin was instantly amused. "Your Fiennes family is going to throw the crime of assassinating me on a lunatic." The woman's expression did not change and she said, "Count, do you know what her other identity is other than being the wife of the Viscounts?" "What?" "She is also the Bishop of Skylark City." Colin raised his eyebrows and finally understood what the other party meant. "Killing a bishop, Knight Beatrice, aren't you afraid of incurring the wrath of the church?" Beatrice's expression was calm, and she said lightly, "When this woman deliberately provoked the warriors of the Fiennes family to die for some unspeakable purpose, she was no longer worthy of the glory of my lord. If His Holiness the Pope wants to punish such a person, I will take responsibility." The admiration in Colin's eyes grew stronger. To be honest, ever since crossing the Raging Water River and entering the eastern region, Colin was actually quite disappointed. He felt that in the vast eastern region, there were not many heroes who could make him look at them in a different light. This kind of hero did not need to be strong, but a kind of aura, a kind of belief, and a kind of perseverance. The Duke of St. Prospero was strong enough, but this kind of person who was hesitant and overcautious when choosing an heir could not gain Colin's respect. As for Marquis Vincent, Earl of Avon, Earl Brugan, Earl Hall, and so on, in Colin's view, they were all useless and could not withstand a single blow. However, when he saw Knight Beatrice outside Skylark City, who dared to open the city gate alone, holding the head of her daughter-in-law in her hand, and walked into the blood cavalry formation as if no one was around, he suddenly felt the long-lost heroic spirit, even if the strength of this woman was estimated to be around the 3rd or 4th grade. "So Knight Beatrice, you came to see me this time to give me this head?" "Of course not." Beatrice shook her head and threw the head in her hand to the guard beside Colin, then smiled and invited, "Distinguished guest from the northern frontier, do you dare to come to Skylark City and feel the true sincerity and enthusiasm of the Fiennes family?" The blood on the woman's hand had not dried up, and the smile on her face had a hint of provocation, but this obviously could not scare Colin. "Okay." Colin gently squeezed the horse's belly and slowly stepped forward. At the same time, he ordered the soldiers around him, "Wait for me outside the city." "My lord." The blood cavalry soldiers' faces changed, and they all wanted to dissuade him, but Colin immediately raised his hand, indicating that he had made up his mind. Beatrice's face showed a look of appreciation, but she still suggested, "My lord, don't you need to bring a few guards?" Colin laughed and said, "If you dare to go out of the city alone, I naturally dare to enter the city alone." Beatrice also laughed and immediately stopped talking. She waved her whip and rushed to Skylark City. Colin also urged his horse and followed closely. Chapter 471. There were no skylarks in Skylark City in winter. However, Colin saw a lot of nests in the eaves and corners of the houses along the way. He could imagine that when the flowers bloomed in spring, the sky of the city would be quite lively. "Knight Beatrice, do you know where these skylarks migrate to in winter?" Beatrice froze for a moment, apparently not expecting Colin to ask such a question. At this time, they were walking on the streets of Skylark City, and both sides were crowded with angry people from the eastern region. Nowadays, Colin's reputation in the eastern region was not good, and he was almost synonymous with the devil. If it were not for the guards of the Fiennes family on both sides of the road, it was estimated that many people from the eastern region would have rushed up to tear Colin to pieces. But under such circumstances, Colin was still concerned about the migration of skylarks, which made Beatrice very surprised. Skylarks migrate east in winter. Will they migrate into the Radiant Moon Forest? I don't know about this. Beatrice shook her head and said, "If you are interested in this, you can ask the easternmost Yevel in the eastern region." Colin nodded, thinking that one day he would go to the Arcane City to have a look. The reason why he was concerned about the migration of skylarks was that he thought of a problem. If skylarks could migrate into the Radiant Moon Forest, didn't that mean that the taboo of the Radiant Moon Forest only existed on the ground? Of course, this made no difference to humans. After all, even paladins could only fly for a short time, and could not fly for long distances. However, Colin could fly. While he was thinking, Colin had been led into the castle of the Fiennes family by Beatrice, and came to the living room. Beatrice waved away the maids who wanted to come forward to serve him, poured a glass of red wine, and then personally delivered it to Colin. The wine swirled in the glass, and it was as red as blood. Colin took it with a smile and drank it in one gulp. If it were Grace, she would probably ask, "Aren't you afraid that the wine is poisoned?" But Beatrice would not test him like this. The straightforward female knight just smiled and looked at him with appreciation. "Your Excellency, is my good-for-nothing son doing well?" "Very well." Colin smiled. "Silvermoon City is a good place. Half-elves are also a hospitable race." "That's good." Beatrice did not seem to be too worried about her son. She asked calmly, "Then, Your Excellency, what are the conditions for redeeming viscounts?" Colin turned the red wine glass in his hand and asked, "What else can your Fiennes family give me now?" "Money, slaves, beauties. Count, as long as you ask, the fines will do their best to satisfy your requests. But Beatrice changed the topic. I feel that these things are not good enough for you. Really? Colin put down the wine glass, leaned back on the chair, and asked with interest, Then what do you think is worthy of me? Beatrice's amber eyes flashed with a strange light. She came in front of Colin and refilled the wine glass as she said, Don't worry, Colin. How about a head? Colin narrowed his eyes and smiled. That depends on whose head it is. Beatrice put the wine glass in front of Colin and smiled. Archbishop Kate, what do you think? Duchess? Colin was shocked. Of course, he knew that the Archbishop Kate, mentioned by Beatrice, was the wife of the Duke of St. Prospero. However, this valiant female knight had just killed the Archbishop of Skylark City, and now she was proposing to kill the Archbishop of the Eastern region. Was she determined to go against the church? Colin suddenly thought of something. He immediately crossed his hands and made a lotus-like gesture. However, Beatrice only frowned after seeing the handprint. She asked in confusion, Count, is this wine not to your liking? Colin smiled awkwardly. He reached out and took the wine glass from Beatrice and put it to his mouth. He took the opportunity to drink to cover up his embarrassment. Originally, he thought that Beatrice was another chess piece that Queen Medela had placed in the Eastern region, but now it seemed that he had thought too much. Knight Beatrice, do you have a grudge against the church? There is no personal grudge, but there is public indignation. Colin took a sip of wine and signaled Beatrice to continue her explanation with his eyes. Beatrice did not continue, but asked, Your Excellency, what do you think is the biggest hidden danger of the Empire of Light? The orcs? No. Beatrice shook her head slowly. The orcs seem to be aggressive, but they are not terrible. Since the Empire of Light has repelled the orcs twice, they can naturally do it a third time. Furthermore, I believe that external threats are necessary. As someone from the Northern Territory, you should be able to understand this logic after fighting the trolls for so many years. Colin nodded. He had already guessed what Beatrice was about to say, but he did not speak. He just listened quietly. I think that the degenerate and decadent church is the biggest cancer and hidden danger in the empire. Colin looked at the calm Beatrice and reminded her with a smile, Knight Beatrice, do you know what will happen to you if this statement is spread? Burned at the stake? Beatrice shrugged and said nonchalantly. Colin put down his glass, changed his sitting position, and asked, Then tell me, how did the church become the cancer of the empire? Beatrice refilled Colin's glass and said slowly, Because of its existence, the Empire of Light is divided. For example, your invasion of the Eastern region this time, if I'm not wrong, should be ordered by the royal family? Colin took the glass and did not admit or deny it. Beatrice did not care and continued. The royal family and the church have been fighting openly and covertly since the founding of the empire. Such infighting has seriously damaged the stability and unity of the empire. The church, which was supposed to spread the glory of our Lord and help the people achieve salvation, has lost itself in the struggle for power and profit. All they think about all day is how to divide the forces of the lords to help them fight against the royal family and protect their own interests. The House of St. Prospero in the Eastern region is such a tool, or more accurately, a victim. My good daughter-in-law, the Bishop of Skylark City, why did she encourage the Knights of the Fines to assassinate you? Isn't it to make the Eastern region and the Northern frontier have an irreconcilable feud? And the Duchess, who is the Archbishop of the Eastern region, I know all about the little tricks she played in White Dew Castle. Hearing this, Colin could not help but have some doubts on his face. Beatrice saw this and immediately said, Count, please allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Beatrice St. Prospero. Colin raised his eyebrows. He did not expect this knight to be from the House of St. Prospero, but the doubts on his face did not completely dissipate. In his opinion, a lady like Beatrice who married into the Viscount's family of the House of St. Prospero was probably from a collateral family. Moreover, she had been married for so many years. How could she be so clear about the secrets of White Dew Castle? However, Beatrice continued, Don't worry. I am the sister of the Duke of St. Prospero. Chapter 472. You are the sister of the Duke of St. Prospero? Colin's eyes widened in disbelief. What? Do I not look like it? Beatrice raised her eyebrows and asked. Colin did not speak. He just felt that as the sister of the Duke of St. Prospero, Beatrice actually married into a viscount's family. It was a bit too tragic. For comparison, Medela, as the sister of the previous Duke of St. Hilda, married Emperor Reinhardt. Even if Beatrice could not marry into the royal family, she would not be reduced to marrying into this unknown Fiennes family. As if she saw Colin's doubts, Beatrice immediately explained. It was because I offended that bitch from the church, and my stupid brother was bewitched by her, so I married into this damned place, Skylark City. Actually, I even escaped from the marriage. Unfortunately, I was caught by my brother. Colin's forehead was full of black lines. The person in front of him was probably a spoiled and willful young lady. Beatrice was still there sighing. What kind of magic do you think the bitch from the church has? My brother is like this, and so is my useless son. Ever since he married the Bishop of Skylark City, he no longer listens to me. Now that he is imprisoned in Silvermoon City, he deserves it. It is a good opportunity for him to reflect on his previous foolish actions. Colin suddenly felt that this Beatrice was targeting the church not because of public anger, but because of personal hatred. Previously, when she said that the church was the cancer of the Radiant Empire, it was probably a high-sounding excuse. The real reason was because of the betrayal of her brother and son. Seeing that Colin did not speak, Beatrice urged, "How about it? I help you kill that bitch Kate, and you let my son go, and you will no longer make things difficult for the Fiennes family?" Colin was a bit speechless and said, "Why do I feel that you obviously want to kill Kate yourself? How did it become helping me?" Beatrice snorted and said, "Count Angeli, don't tell me you don't understand. If Kate dies in my hands, what kind of effect will it have?" This time, Colin did not refute. Indeed, he really wanted to see the Duchess die in Beatrice's hands. After all, the influence of the church represented by the Duchess would obviously have a great negative impact on Colin's plan to control the eastern region. Hence, Colin did not wish to see this woman get in the way of things in White Dew City. However, he did not wish to kill Kate with his own hands, because if he did, he would completely enrage the church. Colin didn't want to do such a stupid thing. The power of the church that Colin understood was already terrifying enough, and this was only the power that was on the surface. Who knew how much power was hidden in the dark? Colin definitely did not want to be on the church's blacklist. But if the Duchess died in the hands of Beatrice, then Colin would not have to bear the wrath of the church. More importantly, Beatrice's surname was St. Prospero. If the follow-up operation was done properly, it could completely create a gap between the House of St. Prospero and the church, and even make the eastern region completely side with the royal family. This was simply killing many birds with one stone. But because this matter was so beautiful, Colin could not believe it for a moment. "Knight Beatrice, are you willing to pay such a high price for a Fiennes Viscounts?" Colin couldn't help but ask. It was not that he looked down on the Fiennes Viscounts, but the price that Beatrice paid in order to redeem her son was a bit too high. She gambled the future of herself, the Fiennes, the House of St. Prospero, and even the entire eastern region. Or could it be that this vengeful woman had reached such a desperate point in order to take revenge on her sister-in-law who bullied her in the past? Colin had seen many stupid people, but he knew that the one in front of him was obviously not one. The previous series of actions were not something that a stupid person could do. "Of course, I'm not just doing it for that good-for-nothing son," Beatrice said frankly. "He's not that important. The reason why I'm doing this is actually to help the Empire of Light eliminate the internal dangers." Colin raised his eyebrows and said in surprise, "You want to use this to force the House of St. Prospero to fight against the church?" To be more precise, it should be to suppress the church. Beatrice looked seriously into Colin's eyes, her amber eyes flashing with a deep and firm light. "Now that this church has seriously affected the stability and unity of the Empire, we must cut off its tentacles everywhere, and let the gods belong to the gods, and the secular belong to the secular. Only in this way can the Empire of Light firmly guard the most fertile land on this continent, and humans will not follow in the footsteps of the elves and dragons. Colin's expression gradually became serious. Originally, Colin thought that Beatrice and Queen Medela were allies. After all, they were both trying to fight against the church. Now it seemed that the two of them were not on the same side at all. To be honest, although Beatrice's power was completely incomparable to Queen Medela's, if he had to choose an ally to fight against the church, Colin would not hesitate to choose Beatrice. Queen Medela would only continue to encourage Colin to be the vanguard against the church, while she hid behind and tried to take advantage of the situation. As for Beatrice, the female knight first cut off the head of a bishop with her own hands, and now she was eyeing the archbishop of the eastern region. Colin believed that Beatrice should be selfless. She really wanted to suppress the church's intervention in the secular world, so that the Empire of Light could be united and not collapse in internal friction. Even if he knew that Beatrice's actions were very beneficial to him, Colin could not help but remind her. Knight Beatrice, you should understand that if it was just a bishop of Skylark City, there would still be room for negotiation, but if you really kill the archbishop of the eastern region, then even the House of St. Prospero can't protect you. Beatrice smiled and said, When did I need the protection of the House of St. Prospero? As for the church's anger, I have already prepared for it, so you don't have to worry. Colin's expression was complicated. He opened his mouth but only sighed and said, You are a real knight. Beatrice's eyes were calm and firm as she accepted Colin's praise. Then she looked serious and said, Well, if you agree to this proposal, then I need your help. How can I help? Because I tried to assassinate Kate once before, so she is already on guard against me. I need you to help me control the guardian knights around her. Colin was speechless again. This was not the first time this woman tried to assassinate the Archbishop of the Eastern region. It seemed that the Duke of St. Prospero was lenient enough to only marry her to Skylark City. Beatrice, of course, did not know what Colin was thinking and continued. My plan is like this. I will go to White Dew City alone, and you will lead the army there later. Don't worry, you don't have to attack White Dew City. I will help you open the gate. After entering the city, you will lead the Blood Cavalry and follow me. As long as you can help me eliminate the guards around Kate, I can kill her with my own hands. Due to the lag in the transmission of information, Beatrice did not know that White Dew City had actually been breached by the Blood Cavalry once, and her brother, the Duke of St. Prospero, was killed. Colin hesitated for a moment, and did not tell her this. He wanted to know if Beatrice would stick to her heart, and continue to fulfill her promise after entering the city and learning the news. Good. It's settled. Happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. Chapter 473. After leaving Skylark City, Colin finally met up with the main force of the Blood Cavalry after traveling for another 2 days. Since he had already personally participated in the operation in White Dew City through the Blood Slaves, Colin had a general understanding of the situation, but he still patiently listened to Knight Roger's report. But at the end of the report, Knight Roger gave Colin a small surprise. The messenger of the royal family? Yes, Count. We met him after we evacuated from White Dew City. He claimed that he was going to deliver the war order signed by His Majesty to the House of St. Prospero. So I brought him along. Do you want to see him? Colin was a bit speechless. He said angrily, You are getting bolder and bolder. You even dare to kidnap the messenger of the royal family. Knight Roger shrunk his head and didn't dare to say anything. Forget it, bring him to see me. Yes. Knight Roger hurriedly turned around and left. Not long after, he came back with a young and handsome knight. This person was wearing a gorgeous armor with the badge of Scarlet Flame of Purification. Obviously, this person was not only the messenger of the royal family, but also a member of the San Lorenzo family. Count Angeli, you dare to allow your subordinates to kidnap the messenger of the royal family. Aren't you afraid of His Majesty's punishment? The young knight shouted at Colin with his head held high, his face full of arrogance as if he had not experienced the harsh beating of society. Colin smiled and said, You said that you are the messenger of the royal family. Do you have any evidence? The young knight snorted and took out a scroll from his pocket. He opened it in front of Colin and said, This is the war order signed by His Majesty Reinhardt himself. There is also the symbol of the royal family on it. Count Angeli, don't tell me you don't recognize it? Colin took a closer look, then he immediately showed a look of realization. Ah, I see. Ah, Mr. Messenger, I'm really sorry my stupid knights don't know anything, so they didn't recognize your identity. Roger, quickly come and apologize to Mr. Messenger. Knight Roger lowered his head and bowed. I'm sorry, Mr. Messenger. The messenger rolled his eyes and said in a disdainful tone. Count Angeli, are you trying to fool us with a simple apology? Cousin Andy, I didn't expect to see you here. Prince Harrison ran out at the right time. Your Royal Highness, Your Royal Highness. Andy hurriedly saluted. Seeing that Princess Judy was also there, he had no choice but to salute again. Only then did he realize that the young count in front of him was the teacher of the prince and princess. He immediately put away his arrogance and didn't dare to pursue the matter any further. Count Angeli, His Majesty has entrusted me with the task. I must hand this war order to Duke St. Pros as soon as possible. I can let bygones be bygones, but now, I must rush to White Dew City immediately. Please don't stop me. Of course I won't stop the emissary of the royal family. Colin chuckled. However, if you want to hand over the war order to the Duke of St. Prospero, there's no need to go to White Dew City. Knight Andy immediately frowned. What do you mean? What I mean is that the Duke of St. Prospero is here. Knight Andy was stunned. Count Angeli, are you kidding me? Knight Roger, who had his head lowered, smiled and said, Mr. Messenger, the Duke of St. Prospero was indeed invited by us. Knight Andy looked at the two in shock. After a while he said, All right, please take me to meet the Duke of St. Prospero. This way, please. Knight Roger led the group to a huge tent. He opened the curtain and made an inviting gesture. Knight Andy took the lead and walked in. He then found that the tent was empty. There was only a black coffin in the middle of the tent. Count Angeli, are you kidding me? Knight Andy turned around and stared at Colin angrily. Colin ignored Knight Andy. He walked to the coffin and opened the lid. Bang! The coffin lid hit the ground and dust flew everywhere. Colin turned around and said to Knight Andy with an expressionless face, Knight Andy, come and greet the Duke of St. Prospero. You. The Knight of Andy suddenly had an ominous premonition. A terrible thought appeared in his mind, but he immediately rejected it. Impossible. Knight Andy slowly walked to the coffin and looked inside. After that, he felt like he was struck by lightning. His whole body froze on the spot. No. This is impossible. This is impossible. Knight Andy felt a chill down his spine. He couldn't help but tremble. Colin patted Andy's shoulder and said, Knight Andy, now you understand. The Blood Cavalry brought you here out of kindness. They didn't want you to go to White Dew City for nothing. Knight Andy only felt like he was being stared at by a horrible monster. Although Count Angeli was gentle and didn't do anything hostile, he still felt that his life was seriously threatened. Knight Andy swallowed hard. He no longer had the arrogance he had before. He tried to put on a brave front and said, Count Angeli, how dare you kill the Duke of St. Prospero? Colin shrugged and said, The Duke of St. Prospero was killed by the Blood Cavalry on the battlefield. What's wrong with that? The Empire of Light had restrictions on the fighting among the nobles. Despicable acts such as assassination, poisoning, backstabbing, and so on were obviously not tolerated. However, under these two circumstances it was fine for the nobles to kill each other. One was a duel. The other was to kill them openly on the battlefield. So, the Blood Cavalry broke into White Dew City? Yes, just 3 days ago. At that time, the Duke of St. Prospero fought bravely to the last moment. I also admired him very much. Colin pretended to exclaim. Knight Andy trembled and asked, But the orcs' invasion was imminent. How could you? Colin spread out his hands and said without fear. But at that time, His Majesty's war order hadn't been sent to White Dew City yet. Knight Andy was speechless. In fact, the news that His Majesty was about to start a war had already spread. However, the war order signed by His Majesty with legal effect needed to be delivered by people. It was definitely much slower than carrier pigeons. This time difference became Colin's excuse. The key was that no one could punish Colin for this, because he really didn't see the war order. Knight Andy's expression changed, and finally he had to say, "Since the Duke of St. Prospero is dead, then I will go to White Dew Castle and send the war order to the next Duke of the Eastern region." "That's just right. We can go together," Colin said with a smile. Knight Andy suddenly became alert. "Why are you going to White Dew City?" "Of course, to congratulate the new Duke of the Eastern region." Colin's face was natural. Knight Andy didn't say anything. He didn't seem to want to stay in this gloomy place any longer. He then half-heartedly cupped his hands and turned to leave in a hurry. The curtain hung down, blocking the sunlight outside. Only the flickering candlelight was left in the tent, reflecting on Colin's expressionless face. He stood alone beside the coffin and quietly looked at the body of the Duke of St. Prospero for a long time. Finally, he revealed an excited smile. Then he opened his mouth and revealed his ferocious fangs. He bit down. Gulp, gulp. Chapter 474. The night gradually darkened. In the dark tent, a few rows of candles were trying their best to burn themselves, barely managing to push open the darkness. Under the illumination of the candlelight, a bloody mist surrounded the coffin in the center of the tent, rising into the air. Within the bloody mist, Colin's figure flickered in and out of existence, seeming both real and illusory. As time passed, a faint blood-red pattern gradually appeared on Colin's body. It looked like an arcane spell formation, but also like the trajectory of the stars. Traces of terrifying aura were emitted uncontrollably, suppressing the flickering candles in the tent until they dimmed. The thick darkness took this opportunity to expand without restraint, causing the atmosphere in the tent to become even more sinister. Suddenly, two spots of light appeared, tearing apart the darkness. It was Colin who had opened his eyes. His pupils had turned into bright red vertical slits, emitting a cold light. The light disappeared in a flash, and Colin also raised his head from the Duke of St. Prospero, who had turned into a dried corpse. He could clearly feel that every cell in his body seemed to be cheering in joy. The bloody mist around him seemed to be able to absorb some mysterious energy particles from the air, transforming them into nourishing energy that he absorbed into his body. The cells in his body that were nourished by this mysterious energy began to evolve at an accelerated rate. His muscle fibers became stronger and more resilient, and his bones and joints became more crystalline. The blood in his body also surged restlessly in his veins like a raging tide. Thump, thump, thump. Colin's heart began to beat rapidly like a powerful pump, causing the blood in his body to surge even more violently, even to the point of boiling. The rising blood pressure caused all the blood vessels in Colin's body to protrude, wrapping around his body like purple steel ropes. His muscles also began to swell due to the congestion of blood, quickly filling up the original armor. A pair of black bat wings pierced through the armor, slowly extending from Colin's back. Boom. The armor could no longer withstand this force, and it was completely blown apart by Colin's expanding body. Fortunately, this tent was big enough. Otherwise, it might not be able to accommodate Colin in his true vampire body state. It was not the first time that Colin had promoted to a higher level by sucking the blood of a high-level knight. Therefore, Colin was not too amazed by the changes in his body. Instead, he was carefully sensing the source of this marvelous strength. His blood was boiling, his body was moving restlessly, and his consciousness, under the pain brought about by this drastic change, actually started to become blurry. However, Colin gritted his teeth and forced himself to stay conscious. In a trance, countless images, information, and memories flashed before his eyes. He tried his best to see those images clearly, but it was as if they were separated by a layer of hazy gauze. A faint murmur sounded in his ears, as if someone was whispering. The blood mist rose into the air, condensing into mysterious and complicated blood patterns on the surface of Colin's enormous body. Bang, bang, bang. With his heart beating violently, Colin's consciousness became more and more blurry, and his eyes became more and more empty. In an instant, an unstoppable darkness swept over, completely drowning Colin's consciousness. Crack. A bolt of lightning tore through the darkness. Colin opened his eyes again, and found that he was standing on the peak of a mountain, but the ground under his feet was silver. Crack! Another bolt of lightning flashed. Colin found a dark figure at the edge of the cliff. The figure held a torch high in his hand, and the dancing flame became the only light in this darkness. That person threw the torch down the cliff. The red flame drew a line of fire in the air, tumbling down into the bottomless abyss. Crack! The third bolt of lightning flashed. The lightning illuminated the entire mountain peak. At this time, Colin found that the mountain peak was full of people, and he seemed to be one of them. These figures all raised their hands up high and mumbled something. "Wake up, Almighty King!" The sound of prayers rang in Colin's ears, but strangely he could not hear the specific content of the prayers. Crack! The fourth bolt of lightning flashed. The lightning illuminated everything between heaven and earth. In the pitch-black abyss, a dark red flame slowly rose up. No, that was not a flame. Colin abruptly came back to his senses, only to discover that it was a gigantic, dark red, ferocious vertical pupil. The place he was standing on was not a mountain peak, but the head of a giant beast. In the darkness, lightning flashed in the sky, and Colin finally saw the scene in front of him. It was an incomparably huge silver python. The python's huge body was like a mountain range, stretching to the end of his vision. Under the lightning, there were bloody wounds that were deep to the bone on the python's body. The giant python's murky eyes quietly stared at Colin, and in the dark red vertical pupil, Colin's face was reflected. It seemed to want to say something, but Colin could not receive any information. He could only see the python's helplessness, old age, and sadness from its single eye. It was like an old king who had reached the end of his road, and was looking forward to a successor who could replace him, a new king. Boom! The last bolt of lightning flashed by. Everything returned to the boundless darkness. The silver python's vertical pupil also disappeared. But Colin could still vaguely hear whispers echoing in his ears. Maybe the python was trying to say something to him. Unfortunately, he could not hear it clearly. Outside the tent, Knight Roger heard the noise and quickly walked over, but he was blocked by a blood thrall. What happened to the Count? The blood thrall did not answer, and only quietly stood in front of Knight Roger. "Even I can't go in?" Knight Roger asked angrily, but the blood thrall in front of him was still unmoved. Knight Roger knew that these people were Count Angeli's personal guards. They had a mysterious background, but they were all very strong, and they fought bravely without fear of death. If he did not know that these personal guards would not betray Count Angeli, Knight Roger might have already forced his way in. At this moment, the indistinct murmurs in the tent stopped abruptly, but then, an extremely terrifying pressure suddenly erupted, like a surging wave that swept through the entire camp. Knight Roger, who was the closest to the tent, felt this pressure the most. If he did not feel the strong holy light energy and the familiar aura of Count Angeli, he might have already drawn his sword. "Count!" While Knight Roger was anxiously waiting, one of the personal guards outside the tent seemed to have been summoned, and he turned around and walked in. Not long after, he saw Colin walk out in large strides. "Count, are you all right?" Knight Roger hurriedly stepped forward and bowed. At the same time, he also noticed that the armor Count Angeli was wearing seemed to be that of the personal guard who just walked into the tent. But he did not dare to ask too much, and only hid this doubt in the bottom of his heart. "Is there anything to eat?" Colin opened his mouth and asked. His eyes flashed red from time to time, and his body was still emitting holy light energy. It seemed that he was unable to perfectly control the sudden increase in power. "Of course there is. Please wait a moment." Knight Roger raised his head, and felt the surging power on Colin's body. He could not help but ask, "Count, have you advanced to rank 6? Colin nodded and looked in the direction of White Dew City. "Yes." Chapter 475. White Dew Castle. It was late at night. It was early winter, and the weather was cold. There was a faint scent of night orchid in the air, silently soothing the anxious hearts of the people in the castle. "Duchess, has Vincent not woken up yet?" "Not yet." The Marquise's face was full of sorrow. She bit her lips and wanted to say something, but seeing the Duchess's serious expression, She did not dare to say anything. I'm going to perform a healing spell on the Marquis. You can leave first. The Duchess waved her hand. Yes. The Marquise and the maids quietly left, leaving only the Duchess and Marquis Vincent in the room. The Duchess sat down on the armchair next to the bed, quietly looking at her sleeping son. Marquis Vincent lay on his back on the sickbed, his body covered with a pure white blanket. His face was as white as a sheet, and his breathing was weak, as if he would stop breathing in the next second. However, he did not take his last breath. My child, why do you have to hold on so bitterly? The Duchess reached out and gently stroked Marquis Vincent's face, her eyes full of distress and confusion, but they were quickly replaced by determination and indifference. Don't worry, Mother will soon free you. Don't blame Mother for being cruel. This is a necessary sacrifice. Only then can we win back the attention of our Lord. After saying that, the Duchess put her hands together and silently prayed. She then reached out her right hand and lightly touched Marquis Vincent's forehead, nose, and lips with her index finger. A faint holy light spread from her fingertips, making Marquis Vincent's pale face instantly become incomparably holy. If someone who understood the Church's divine arts were here, they would realize that what the Duchess was performing was not a healing spell, but a prayer spell that allowed the dead to rest in peace. The holy light gradually dimmed, and the Duchess took out an exquisite small bottle from her bosom. The bottle was a bottle of holy water, but only the Duchess knew what was inside. But just as the Duchess was about to feed the water into Marquis Vincent's mouth, there was a sudden knock on the door. The Duchess frowned and continued to feed the water into Marquis Vincent's mouth, then got up and opened the door. Didn't I say not to disturb me at this time? The butler apologized profusely, but still reported, Madam, Miss Beatrice has just entered the city. Beatrice. The Duchess' expression changed, as if she had recalled a bad memory. She then walked out with a gloomy face. Walking down the spiral staircase to the hall on the first floor, the Duchess happened to bump into Beatrice, who was coming in. Kate. Beatrice. As soon as the two women met, sparks seemed to fly in the air. The knight who was originally behind the Duchess took a step forward. At the same time, he put his right hand on the sword at his waist and looked at Beatrice vigilantly. It couldn't be helped. This young miss had a criminal record. Beatrice rolled her eyes and said disdainfully, I haven't seen you for so many years, but you're still so timid. I haven't seen you for so many years, and you're still as rude as ever, the Duchess retorted. Beatrice pursed her lips, and did not want to be entangled with the Duchess. She asked the butler, Where is my brother? The butler sighed and said with a sorrowful expression, The Duke. I'm afraid he's already met with misfortune. What? Beatrice's eyes widened. She immediately grabbed the butler's collar and asked, What the hell is going on? The butler had to tell the story of how the blood cavalry broke through the White Dew City with trepidation. After listening to it, Beatrice seemed to have lost her soul. She stood there in a daze. The Duchess said coldly, Beatrice, now you know the seriousness of the situation, right? Stay here and don't make any more trouble for me. After that, the Duchess strode out. Beatrice did not refute. She just let go of the butler's collar, and stood there with her expression constantly changing. The butler waited for a long time. Seeing that Beatrice had not moved, he suggested in a low voice, Miss Beatrice, I have ordered someone to tidy up your room. You have been tired from the journey. Why don't you wash up and rest first? Beatrice did not respond to the words. Just when the butler did not know what to do, she finally spoke. You said that my brother had issued a conscription order to the lords south of the Alsace Mountains. Why didn't the Fines family receive it? It can't be. I personally helped the Duke organize the conscription order. One of them was sent to Skylark City. Beatrice narrowed her eyes and immediately realized that the conscription order should have been hidden by her good daughter-in-law. The purpose of her doing so was not difficult to guess. She must have wanted to ambush Colin and his party from Tinder City first, and then lead the private army of the Fines family to defeat the blood cavalry passing through Skylark City. Unfortunately, before she could lead the army out of the city, she was killed by Beatrice, who had learned the news. This stupid woman. She deserved to die. Beatrice's heart was boiling with anger. Although she had a lot of dissatisfaction with her brother, the Duke of St. Prospero, his death still gave Beatrice a great blow. Thinking of her agreement with Colin Angelo in Skylark City, Beatrice was shaken for a moment. Did she really want to cooperate with the enemy who killed her brother? What made her feel even more confused was the future of the Eastern region. No matter how mediocre the Duke of St. Prospero was, at least he could control the situation. With him, the situation in the Eastern region would not be too bad. But now, with the death of the Duke of St. Prospero, the problem of the heir immediately became obvious. The eldest son, Vincent, still occupied the position of Marquis of the Eastern region. It stood to reason that he should inherit the position of Duke. However, not long ago, the Duke of St. Prospero, under the urging of some people, wantonly weakened the support of Marquis Vincent, and began to support the second son, the Earl of Avon. As a result, the Earl of Avon, who originally had no hope of inheriting the position of Duke, now had the confidence to compete with Marquis Vincent. More importantly, the battle for the heir was similar to a duel. Once involved, it was impossible to withdraw before the life and death was determined. Originally, Marquis Vincent might have been able to tolerate his younger brother who wasn't a threat to him, but after Evan revealed his intention to fight for the title of Duke, Marquis Vincent obviously wouldn't be so magnanimous anymore. Similarly, Count Evan wouldn't wait for his elder brother to inherit the title of Duke, and then face the inevitable suppression and ostracization. Coupled with the covetous northern frontier and the sinister church, Beatrice's mind was in a mess for a moment. Miss Beatrice. The butler saw that Beatrice was silent for a long time, and could not help but remind her. Beatrice came back to her senses and said, "You just said that Vincent was seriously injured in that battle." "Yes." "Take me to see him." "Yes." Chapter 476. Has he never woken up? No. Faced with Beatrice's question, the Marquise shook her head mechanically. Her husband seemed like he would wake up in the next moment, but it also seemed like he would never open his eyes. After so many days, from the initial hope to the gradual disappointment, the young Marquise had been tormented to the point of numbness. Beatrice looked at the haggard Marquise and sighed. "Go and rest. I'll take care of Vincent tonight." The Marquise shook her head. She knew that not only her, but the entire Hall family's greatest hope now rested on her husband. Under such pressure, she did not dare to relax at all. Even if she knew that it would be futile, even if she stayed by the bedside, she still stayed, as if this was the only way to ease the anxiety in her heart. "Think about Eckhart. He needs you too." Hearing her son's name, the Marquise's eyes finally lit up. After struggling for a moment, she got up and said, "Madame Beatrice, I'll have to trouble you to take care of Vincent tonight." With that, the Marquise left the room. Beatrice said to the maids, "All of you can leave first. I'll call for you if there's anything." "Yes," the maidservants replied, and then they quietly retreated. When the door was closed again, Beatrice said softly, "All right. There's no one else here." Then Marquise Vincent opened his eyes. Seeing this, Beatrice was not surprised at all. She had insisted on persuading the Marquise to leave just now because Marquise Vincent had touched her body very secretly. The Marquise, who was in a trance and extremely haggard, obviously did not notice all this. "Aunt, you're finally here." Marquise Vincent grabbed Beatrice's hand, and finally showed a sincere smile on his face. "What's going on? Why did you have to pretend to be unconscious?" Marquise Vincent took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Because Mother wants to kill me." "Kate wants to kill you?" Beatrice looked at Marquise Vincent in surprise and frowned. "Although I've always thought that crazy woman is willing to kill anyone for the church, she shouldn't go so far as to kill her own son, right? What's more, what's in it for her? My guess is that she wants to push me to the position of Duke of the Eastern region, and then kill me. This way, Eckhart will become the first heir to the position of Duke of the Eastern region." Beatrice suddenly understood and said, "So that's how it is. Once a 3-year-old Duke of the Eastern region succeeds to the throne, the Eastern region will be under the control of that bitch Kate." "That's right." Marquis Vincent's eyes flickered with pain and hatred. "That's why she didn't treat me seriously before. She clearly hoped that I would die from my injuries as soon as possible. Even when she saw me hanging on to my last breath, she still. What else is she doing? Nothing. Marquis Vincent immediately changed the subject. Over the years, my mother has roped in countless nobles of the eastern region. Even the house of Saint Prospero has been infiltrated by the church, so I didn't dare to trust anyone. I could only pretend to be in a coma until you appeared. Aunt, you're the only person I can trust now. Beatrice laughed at herself and said, because I'm the last person in the eastern region who can be bought by Carter, right? Yes. But it's also because you're my most respected knight of the eastern region, the most upright Saint Prospero. Marquis Vincent quickly flattered. Beatrice smiled noncommittally and asked, how are you going to deal with this situation now? Do you still have anyone you can trust? Are there any loyal knights? Are there any troops you can command? Marquis Vincent smiled bitterly and said, Aunt, I only have you now. Beatrice rolled her eyes and scolded him. So you've been pretending to be dead for so many days, but you haven't thought of a way to break the situation? Well, in fact, I did think of a way. Marquis Vincent's eyes flickered. What way? I guess that the forces in White Dew City have been roped in by my mother. So if I want to break the situation, I can only rely on external forces. External forces? Beatrice thought for a moment and wondered. What forces do you have outside White Dew City? Are you referring to Earl Hall? Earl Hall is indeed an important force that I can rely on. However, he is still far away on the New Shui River, and his subordinates are the Navy. He can't do anything about the situation in White Dew City. Then which force are you talking about? Marquis Vincent hesitated for a moment, then lowered his voice and said, the Blood Cavalry. Beatrice raised her beautiful eyebrows and looked at Marquis Vincent with a complicated look. Marquis Vincent quickly explained, Aunt, listen to me. Of course, I know the hatred between the Blood Cavalry and the House of Saint Prospero. I also know that Earl Colin Angeli is treacherous and cunning. He has always been coveting the eastern region. However, in the current situation, I can only use them to deal with the internal threats. Otherwise, the situation in the eastern region will only be worse. Beatrice smiled faintly and said, do you know? In fact, before I came to White Dew City, I met Colin Angeli once in Skylark City, and I reached an agreement with him. Marquis Vincent suddenly widened his eyes and said, what agreement? I helped him kill Kate, and he let go of the Viscount's fine. Marquis Vincent's eyes lit up, and he immediately asked, how are you going to kill Mother? Beatrice did not hide and said frankly, I will secretly open the city gate and let the Blood Cavalry into White Dew City. Since they could kill your father last time, they must be able to kill the guards around your mother this time. In this way, I can kill her with my own hands. After hearing this, Marquis Vincent was silent for a long time before he said, Aunt, in fact, my original plan is similar, but I plan to let my mother die in the hands of the Blood Cavalry. No. Beatrice shook her head slowly. Kate must die in my hands. Marquis Vincent frowned and was very puzzled. Aunt, why do you have to kill my mother with your own hands? Is it because of those grudges in the past? Beatrice glanced at Marquis Vincent and snorted. What? Am I such a vengeful person in your mind? Marquis Vincent quickly shook his head, but before he could think of how to answer this question, he heard Beatrice say again, well, to tell you the truth, I want to kill Kate with my own hands. There is only one reason. To completely break the relationship between the House of Saint Prospero and the Church. This powerful sentence made Marquis Vincent's heart tremble. After thinking for a moment, he finally understood his aunt's painstaking efforts. Indeed, if the Archbishop of the Eastern region died in the hands of Beatrice, there would be an irreparable gap between the House of Saint Prospero and the Church, and the royal family was very likely to accept the House of Saint Prospero's allegiance as a result. The situation of the empire might be completely changed. However, Marquis Vincent was also very clear that Beatrice, who caused this series of upheavals, might suffer endless revenge from the Church. Just as he was about to remind his aunt of the possible consequences of killing an archbishop, he heard her speak again. In addition, I want to kill another person. Ooh, Colin Angelo. Chapter 477. Thump. Thump. Marquis Vincent's heartbeat suddenly accelerated. For a moment, even he himself did not know what he was thinking when he heard that his aunt was going to kill Colin Angeli. Beatrice did not notice Marquis Vincent's strange behavior, and continued to explain to him. Marquis Vincent, Colin Angeli is too dangerous and terrible. Even if the Eastern region successfully gets rid of the control of the church, it can only curl up under his shadow. So this man must die. And once he dies, the blood cavalry will be finished. As long as you can become the Duke of the Eastern region, it will not be difficult to persuade Earl Hall to change his mind. As long as the northern frontier cannot cross the furious river, there is nothing to worry about. What's more, once Colin Angeli dies, the northern frontier will inevitably fall into turmoil. Even if it does not fall into turmoil, it will absolutely be impossible to touch the eastern region. Marquis Garcia is old, and the Battle of Shadow Canyon has destroyed his spirit. Now he does not have the ability to rebuild the Black Cavalry. In this way, you can leisurely reorganize the eastern region and completely eliminate the remnants of the church. You don't have to worry about the church's interference because the royal family will not stand idly by. An archbishop of the eastern region is enough to make the royal family believe in the determination of the House of Saint Prospero. Seeing the struggle on Marquis Vincent's face, Beatrice mistakenly thought that he was still worried about the church's revenge, so she smiled and teased him. Even if the church wants revenge, it will come to me first. I am not afraid. What are you afraid of? Marquis Vincent did not dare to confess his inner struggle to Beatrice, so he had to put on a worried look and said, "Aunt, are you really not worried about the church's revenge?" Beatrice smiled and said, "What's there to be afraid of? At worst, I will hide my identity and wander the world. Anyway, I have wanted to do this for a long time. Your father used to stop me, but now that he is dead, I am free. I don't believe that the church can really chase me to the end of the world." Marquis Vincent was silent. Beatrice thought that he was still worried about her, so she smiled and patted Marquis Vincent's hand and said, "Well, don't put on such a weak appearance. I don't want to see the future Duke of the Eastern region like this. Furthermore, as a knight of the House of Saint Prospero, how could I be afraid of sacrificing myself? I only hope that my sacrifice is meaningful, so what you should do is to properly govern the Eastern region and let it regain its glory. In addition, out of selfishness, I also hope that you can take care of the Fiennes family more and not vent your anger on them because of Evan. And Evan, I really hope that you can show enough mercy. You can strip him of his title, take back his territory, and eliminate his supporters, but at least leave him alive. Because one day, you will find that only the members of the House of Saint Prospero can stand up and protect the Eastern region in times of crisis. Just like your father, he doted on Kite so much back then, but when it really came down to it, didn't he still have to rely on me, his younger sister, to stand up and clean up the situation? No matter how good the others are, they may not be reliable. And no matter how bad Evan is, at least his surname is Saint Prospero." Listening to his aunt's long-winded last words, an indescribable feeling suddenly emerged in Marquis Vincent's heart. In a trance, he seemed to have returned to 20 years ago when he was officially conferred the title of Marquis of the Eastern region by his father. That was the first time he felt a heavy responsibility and an unparalleled sense of sacred mission. Vincent Saint Prospero, today, in the name of the Lord of the Eastern region, I confer you the title of Marquis of the Eastern region. From now on, you will shoulder the responsibility of protecting the people and vassals of the Eastern region, and take this as an honor until the end of your life. His father's words were firmly engraved in Marquis Vincent's heart, but as time passed, these words seemed to be inevitably eroded and obliterated, especially after the fiasco in Silvermoon City. Marquis Vincent felt that his status had plummeted, while his younger brother Evan gradually gained more attention from his father. And when he encountered another failure in Silvermoon City and became a captive, what his father and brother did was the betrayal of the lowly. It was precisely because of this betrayal that Marquis Vincent had no qualms about stabbing that dagger into his father's chest. But now, looking at his aunt Beatrice, who was sitting beside him with a determined and calm expression, Marquis Vincent suddenly felt a strong sense of guilt. The pride of Saint Prospero, the glory of Saint Prospero, and the perseverance of Saint Prospero. Marquis Vincent felt that what he had done was simply blasphemy against the name of Saint Prospero. I, Vincent Saint Prospero, swear in this holy land, under the gaze of the Lord, that from now on, no matter what difficulties I encounter, I will shoulder the responsibility of protecting the eastern region, the responsibility of protecting the glory of the house of Saint Prospero, until the end of my life. The old oath echoed in his ears, and the expression in Marquis Vincent's eyes gradually became firm. Aunt, how do you plan to kill Colin Angeli? Beatrice, of course, knew nothing about the psychological changes in Marquis Vincent. As long as I kill him, I will naturally be able to gain Colin Angeli's trust. When the time comes, I will assassinate him when he is unprepared. I have a great chance of succeeding. Seeing Marquis Vincent frown, Beatrice mistakenly thought that he was worried about the consequences of assassinating an earl, so she spoke again. You don't have to worry about the consequences of doing so. Anyway, I already have the bad reputation of killing an archbishop of the eastern region, so naturally, I am not afraid of bearing the bad reputation of assassinating an earl of the empire. When the time comes, you can just announce that you have removed my name from the house of Saint Prospero, and it would be best if you could expel me from the eastern region, so that I can start my life as a fugitive. Looking at his aunt who was pretending to be relaxed, Marquis Vincent only felt that his throat was blocked, but he still took a deep breath, got rid of these useless pretentious feelings, and said in a deep voice, Aunt, when you assassinate Colin Angeli, please remember to cut off his head. Beatrice smiled faintly and said, No problem. In fact, I also like to cut off the enemy's head very much. It is like receiving a commemorative medal. Aunt, Marquis Vincent tightly grasped Beatrice's hand, and repeated with a dignified expression, Please remember, you must cut off Colin Angeli's head. Beatrice realized that something was wrong. She frowned and asked, Why do you care so much about Colin Angeli's head? Marquis Vincent's expression changed, but in the end he did not say the deepest secret in his heart, he just emphasized, Aunt, if you trust me, then do as I say. Beatrice stared at Marquis Vincent's eyes for a long time before nodding. Okay. Chapter 478. In the boundless wilderness, a large group of cavalrymen was marching southward. They were not moving fast, and it seemed that they were not in a hurry. In the middle of the group, a little girl wearing a black riding suit and a red wide-brimmed hat asked in a crisp voice, Teacher, which family is your mother from? The Sangus family. What about your grandmother? I think it's the Billy family. What about your great-grandmother? The Rick family. What about your great-great-grandmother? Colin glanced at Princess Judy beside him and said somewhat speechlessly, I don't remember. He actually understood why Princess Judy had suddenly started a background check. Of course, it was because he had advanced to the 6th grade. In this world where strength was closely related to bloodline, the bloodline of a 6th grade knight would naturally receive a lot of attention. A bloodline that could give birth to a 6th grade knight was definitely a top bloodline. After all, there were only 7 bloodlines that could give birth to a 7th grade paladin. The Angeli family was obviously not a top bloodline, which was why Princess Judy was concerned about Colin's maternal bloodline. However, Sangus, Billy, Rick. Princess Judy had never heard of these families before. They were clearly unknown small nobles, and had nothing to do with top bloodlines. Princess Judy's lively big eyes rolled a few times, and suddenly had a bold guess about her teacher's background. But she did not dare to say this guess out loud. But if she did not say it out loud, the little girl would feel uncomfortable. As her eyes wandered, she happened to meet Prince Harrison's gaze. The brother and sister seemed to have telepathy, and instantly understood each other's meaning, and immediately smiled knowingly. This little action naturally could not escape Colin's eyes, but he did not explain anything. Misunderstanding that he was the illegitimate son of some great noble in Grey Castle was better than revealing the secret of the vampires. Colin was somewhat curious about whether his increased strength by drinking the blood of high-grade paladins would affect the bloodline of his descendants. If one day he successfully advanced to the sanctuary realm, would a new paladin family be born? As for whether he could advance to the sanctuary realm, Colin did not have any doubts. He was very confident in his vampire cheat. As long as he could get his hands on the fresh blood of a holy knight, Colin was very confident that he would be able to step into the holy realm. However, if such a day really came, then the people of this world would probably think that he was the illegitimate son of a holy knight family member. He wondered if there would be a melodramatic farce of them acknowledging their ancestors. While he was lost in his thoughts, a messenger came back from the front and reported to Colin, "Sir, I'm sorry. Your lordship, White Dew City is just ahead." Hearing this, Colin immediately looked up and saw a small white dot appear on the horizon. "Knight Andy, it's your turn." Knight Andy, who was called out by Colin, immediately bowed and said with a flattering smile, "Okay, please wait a moment. I'll open the door for you." Ever since he learned that Colin had become a knight of the sixth step, the attitude of this emissary from the San Lorenzo family changed completely. He probably thought that Colin was a descendant of some paladin family that had been left behind. And judging from the age when Colin became a knight of the sixth step, it was not impossible for him to advance to the Holy Realm one day with such a terrible talent. Therefore, it was understandable that Knight Andy would be so respectful after being arrogant. "Teacher, we won't fight in White Dew City this time, right?" Princess Judy asked crisply. Colin gave a playful smile and said, "Of course not. After all, His Majesty's war order has been sent." On the city wall of White Dew City, in the face of the approaching bloody cavalry, the defenders in the city certainly did not dare to take it lightly. The Pegasus Legion and the private army of the lords recruited by the Duke of St. Prospero all gathered their elites and waited on the city wall. At the same time, a large number of reserves began to gather on the streets of the city. Last time when the bloody cavalry arrived, the Duke of St. Prospero opened the city gate in order to lure the enemy in. He tried to cooperate with the enemy from the inside and outside, and besieged the bloody cavalry in White Dew City. But it was a pity that this trick failed. Not only did it fail to trap the bloody cavalry, but it also cost the life of the Duke of St. Prospero. It could be said that this strategy was a failure. Therefore, this time, it became the consensus of everyone to defend the city to the death. "Earl Nicole, do you think the bloody cavalry will storm the city?" Hearing the question of a noble behind him, Earl Nicole's old face was slightly pale, but he still pretended to be calm and said, "Don't worry, it's common sense that cavalry is not good at attacking the city. As long as we firmly guard the city gate, and don't let the bloody cavalry enter the city, no matter how crafty Colin Angeli is, he can't do anything." Hearing this, the nobles of the eastern region all agreed, and the atmosphere suddenly became much more relaxed. But Earl Nicole did not feel relaxed at all. In fact, the old Earl only felt sad at this moment. Although they had the absolute advantage in numbers, none of the nobles of the eastern region dared to propose to go out of the city to fight. In fact, even if someone proposed to go out of the city to fight, Earl Nicole would have rejected it. But he still hoped to hear such voices. At least it would prove that the courage of the nobles of the eastern region was not completely wiped out. However, the fact was that only 20,000 bloody cavalry blocked the nobles of the eastern region in White Dew City, and they did not dare to come out. This was simply a great shame. "My lord, the other side sent a messenger, should we bring him up?" Earl Nicole woke up from his thoughts, and saw that the cavalry on the opposite side had separated from the main force, and was heading to White Dew City. "Put down the basket and pull him up. I'd like to see what the people of the northern frontier have to say." After a while, Knight Andy was brought to Earl Nicole. "Knight Andy." Earl Nicole was knowledgeable and recognized the knight of the San Lorenzo family. Then, without waiting for Knight Andy to reply, Earl Nicole immediately realized and said, "You are the messenger of the royal family, right? His Majesty's war order has arrived, right?" "Yes, Earl Nicole, I brought the war order personally signed by His Majesty, and it has been successfully passed by the Senate." Knight Andy waved the letter, but did not intend to hand it to Earl Nicole. He just asked in a reserved manner, "I need to send the war order to White Dew Castle, please excuse me." Of course. Earl Nicole's old face was smiling like a chrysanthemum, because he knew that once His Majesty's war order arrived, the war between the lords of the empire had to stop. So he immediately called his guards and asked them to escort Knight Andy to White Dew Castle. Before Knight Andy left, he did not forget to point outside the city and said, "Earl Angeli from the northern frontier is outside the city. Remember to send someone to welcome him." Earl Nicole frowned again, looking at the cavalry army slowly approaching outside the city, and fell into silence. The nobles of the eastern region around him were still immersed in the excitement of the war order smoothly arriving at White Dew City, and seemed to have forgotten that there was a terrifying army outside the city. Earl Nicole said to his adjutant, "Since Knight Andy came from the bloody cavalry, then Colin Angeli must have seen His Majesty's war order. If he does not want to become a public enemy of the Empire, then he will not start a war. How about this, you send a messenger out of the city to test the other side's attitude?" "My lord, who should I send?" Earl Nicole suddenly hesitated. He glanced at the nobles of the eastern region in front of him, and his frown deepened. "I'll go." Just as Earl Nicole was at his wit's end, Beatrice appeared at the top of the city wall. Count Nickel breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. "Knight Beatrice, it's best if you are willing to go." Chapter 479. Under the White Dew City, Beatrice once again came to the blood cavalry alone. Colin greeted her like a gentleman this time. The two met in the middle of the army and the city. "Knight Beatrice, we meet again." "Count Angeli, you came to the White Dew City in such a big way. Are you not going to fulfill the agreement between us?" Colin shrugged and said helplessly, "You can't blame me. You can only blame the messenger of the royal family for coming too fast." "So, are we going to give up?" Beatrice asked unwillingly. "Give up?" Colin smiled. "There is no such word in my dictionary." Beatrice's eyes lit up and immediately asked, "Count Angeli, do you have any good ideas?" Colin looked at the tall walls of the White Dew City and slowly said, "Since the war order has been sent to the White Dew City, of course, I can't take the initiative to provoke them." Hearing Colin's emphasis on the word, "take the initiative," Beatrice understood and said, "Are you going to let the eastern region do it first?" "Yes." Beatrice slowly shook her head and said, "You may be disappointed. The eastern region is now eager to stop the war with the northern frontier. How can they take the initiative to provoke them?" Colin looked at Beatrice meaningfully and said, "Are you not from the eastern region? You mean let me take the initiative to provoke them?" Beatrice looked at Colin in surprise. "Yes. I know you don't have many troops in the city, but you can choose a time to assassinate me." Hearing this, Beatrice's heart suddenly skipped a few beats, and her eyes subconsciously avoided Angeli's eyes. But soon she found that Colin's expression was not abnormal, so she calmed down. Colin did not find Beatrice's strangeness and still said, "Since you have decided to assassinate the Archbishop of the Eastern region, you must be ready to escape. Then it should be okay to carry the crime of ignoring His Majesty's war order and assassinating the Count of the Empire, right? As long as you stab me, the bloody cavalry will have a reason to enter the city to protect their master. At this time, you can arrange your trusted subordinates to open the city gate for the bloody cavalry. Then the bloody cavalry will help you clear the guards around Mrs. Kate. You should know what to do next, right?" Beatrice took a deep look at Colin, then nodded decisively. "All right, we'll do as you say." After that, Colin returned to the army and ordered Roger to lead the army to camp outside the city. He then brought Prince Harrison, Princess Judy, and 100 guards to follow Beatrice into White Dew City. Walking on the streets of White Dew City, Colin calmly looked around, admiring the scenery of the capital of the eastern region. Compared with the magnificent Winter City, White Dew City was less imposing, but more exquisite. And because it was close to the Radiant Moon Forest, the architectural style in the city was inevitably influenced by the elves, emphasizing the harmony with nature and using reliefs and columns. Compared with the general closed buildings, the ring pillar style of the eastern region's buildings did not have a sense of dullness. Under the sunlight, it could produce rich light and shadow effects and change between reality and illusion. It also weakened the boundary between the inside and outside, so that the outdoor scenery became part of the architectural decoration. This was the first time Colin came to White Dew City, and he immediately fell in love with it. Unfortunately, the people here obviously did not like the Count from the northern frontier. Along the way, countless people of the eastern region did not hide their hatred for Colin. If there were no soldiers on both sides of the street, perhaps the angry people of the eastern region would have already rushed up. Prince Harrison and Princess Judy appeared to be a little nervous under these hostile gazes, but Colin acted as if nothing had happened. He was still admiring the buildings on both sides of the street with great interest. Because of this, Colin did not notice that there were two old acquaintances hidden among the angry people of the eastern region. Let's go, sister. In this case, you can't succeed in the assassination. The Earl of Avon pulled down the brim of his hat, trying to shrink himself to the back of the crowd, and advised Anna beside him. Anna stared at Colin's tall figure on horseback. The veins on her right hand holding the sword were bulging, as if she was about to draw the sword in the next moment. Seeing this, the Earl of Avon quickly held his sister's hand, leaned close to her ear, and whispered, "Anna, believe me, if you assassinate him now, you will only alert him." Anna turned her head, looked at her brother with red eyes, and said angrily, "Are we not going to avenge father?" "Of course," the Earl of Avon said firmly, "but not like this. Believe me, I have a better way." Anna stared into her brother's eyes for a long time, and finally sighed, letting go of the sword hilt. The Earl of Avon quickly pulled his sister out of the crowd, and walked quickly along the alley toward the city gate. Anna became more and more confused as they walked, and finally could not help but ask, "Brother, are you going the wrong way? White Dew Castle is in that direction." "No, we can't go to White Dew Castle." "Why?" "Because once we go to White Dew Castle, I will be under house arrest." Seeing Anna's confused face, the Earl of Avon sighed and said, "Don't ask, sister. If you believe me, then follow me." Anna bit her lip and did not say anything, letting her brother lead her through the city. "Stop, this is a military area. Unrelated people are not allowed to approach." In front of the city gate tower, the brother and sister were stopped by a group of patrolling soldiers. "I have urgent military information to report. Can you take me to see your commanding officer?" The soldier sized up the Earl of Avon. Although he was wearing ordinary clothes, the sword at his waist did not seem to be ordinary. "Then wait here." Not long after, a knight was led to the Earl of Avon by the soldiers. "What urgent military information do you have to report?" The Earl of Avon looked at the insignia on the knight's armor, and lifted the brim of his hat, revealing half of his face, and said, "I want to see Earl Nicole. Can you take me there?" "Is the Earl someone you can see just because you want to?" The knight was stunned as he finally recognized the identity of the person in front of him. You are Lord Earl of Avon?" The Earl of Avon raised a finger. "Don't make a fuss. Take me to see Earl Nicole." The knight nodded blankly, and then led the Earl of Avon and Anna to the city gate tower. On the city gate, Earl Nicole was still staring at the bloody cavalry that was setting up camp outside the city. No one knew what he was thinking. "Earl Nicole, this sir wants to see you." Earl Nicole frowned and asked without turning his head, "Who wants to see me?" "It's me." Hearing this slightly familiar voice, Earl Nicole finally turned his head, and then saw the Earl of Avon's smiling face. "Earl of Avon," Earl Nicole said in surprise, but then immediately lowered his voice and said, "When did you enter the city?" "I've been in the city for a while," the Earl of Avon said vaguely. "Can we change to a more convenient place? I don't want others to know that I'm here." "Okay, please come with me." Chapter 480. As the door was gently closed, the inside and outside of the room were separated into two different worlds. Only Earl Nicole and the Earl of Avon were in the room. Even Anna did not come in. Earl Nicole personally poured a glass of wine for the Earl of Avon and laughed. "Earl of Avon, there is no good wine in the camp. Please make do with it." "Haha, you may not know, but for a real drunkard, good wine is good, but bad wine can also have a different taste." The Earl of Avon took the glass, clinked it with Earl Nicole's, and then drank it in one gulp. Earl Nicole put down his glass and asked, "Earl of Avon, since you have been in White Dew City for a long time, why have you been hiding your whereabouts?" The Earl of Avon laughed and said, Earl Nicole, let's not test each other here and waste time, okay? Don't tell me you don't know the reason why I have not dared to show myself. Earl Nicole also laughed and praised. I have long heard that you are extraordinarily intelligent, Earl of Avon. Seeing you today, I can see that you are indeed so. The Earl of Avon shook his head and sighed. If it was in the past, I might have accepted your praise calmly, and even secretly felt proud. But now, haha, I finally know that compared to a real genius, I am really weak, especially on the battlefield. Earl of Avon, in fact, this is really not your fault. The Eastern Region army has been at peace for too long. Compared to the bloody cavalry that fought their way out of the sky ice field, the difference in strength is too great. No matter who is in command, the result will be the same. The Earl of Avon did not respond. He just poured another glass of wine for himself and Earl Nicole. The two brothers in distress wanted to drown their sorrows in wine. But soon Count Elvin put down his wine cup and said with a serious expression, "Don't worry. Earl Nicole, do you know why I took the initiative to come to you?" Count Nicole glanced at the Earl of Avon and shook his head. Count Evan immediately said in a deep voice, "Count Nicole, I'm here to help you." Oh. Earl Nicole's eyes flashed and he said with a smile, "Earl Evan, why would I need your help?" Earl of Avon did not answer the question directly. Instead, he asked, "What kind of promise did my mother give you?" Obviously, Count Nicole didn't want to reveal the agreement between him and the Duchess to Count Evan. Also, he felt that he had seen through Count Evan's true intentions, so the smile on his face gradually disappeared. "Earl of Avon, I think you're trying to get my help, aren't you? However, with all due respect, your brother is the most suitable successor to the Duke of the Eastern Region in this situation." The Earl of Avon sneered. "My brother? Or my nephew, who's only 3 years old?" Earl Nicole's expression did not change. "Either of them can come, but it can't be you. The Eastern Region needs the Hall family too much at this time." "I agree." The Earl of Avon said frankly, "And you've misunderstood my intentions. I'm not trying to persuade you to support me in becoming the Duke of the Eastern Region." "Oh." Earl Nicole was a little surprised and puzzled. "Then why did you come to me?" "I've already said that I'm here to help you," the Earl of Avon said with a smile. Earl Nicole looked at the Earl of Avon in surprise and asked, "What can you help me with?" "Of course, to help you and the Nicole family get out of their biggest predicament," the Earl of Avon said in a low voice. Count Nicole's frown deepened. "Count Avon, what is the biggest predicament of the Nicole family?" "Earl Nicole, don't you know what your family's biggest predicament is? As an outsider and a traitor, the Nicole family has never been able to truly integrate into the Eastern Region. Do you really think that if you cooperate with my mother this time, she will help you solve this problem in return?" Earl Nicole was silent. He knew that the Earl of Avon was right. The Nicole family's emblem was alpine tinder. Yes, it was the tinder in Tinder City. More than 300 years ago, Tinder City was still the territory of the Nicole family, and the Tinder Army was also the name of the Nicole family's private army. Of course, at that time, the area north of the Alsace Mountains was still the territory of the St. Thean family, and the Nicole family was naturally the vassal of the St. Thean family. Therefore, when the House of St. Prospero defeated the St. Thean family, the Nicole family became an awkward existence. At that time, the Nicole family saw that the situation was not good and decisively chose to surrender to the House of St. Prospero. In order to break the fighting spirit of the vassal of the St. Thean family, the Duke of St. Prospero chose to accept the Nicole family's allegiance to show his mercy. However, the Nicole family was, after all, a vassal of the St. Thean family, and naturally could not be fully trusted by the House of St. Prospero. For example, the Duke of St. Prospero conferred Tinder City, a military stronghold, to the Bruggen family, and the Nicole family's territory was changed to the south of the Alsace Mountains. The Nicole family also knew that the House of St. Prospero had always been vigilant against them, so they had been cautious and low-key for many years, trying to eliminate the prejudice of the Duke of St. Prospero against the Nicole family. For example, in the recent battle for succession between Marquis Vincent and the Earl of Avon, most of the nobles in the Eastern region chose to side with them, but the Nicole family had always been indifferent. Of course, this was indeed because Earl Nicole was astute and knew the risks. But more importantly, it was because the Nickel family did not dare to easily express their stance, for fear of attracting the attention of the Duke of St. Prospero. Now that Count Evan pointed out this point, countless thoughts flashed through Count Nickel's mind. After a while, he said in a deep voice, after a long while he said, "Earl of Avon, I wonder if you have any way to help the Nickel family get out of this awkward situation?" The Earl of Avon smiled mysteriously, and took out an exquisite badge from his arms. The kite shield-shaped badge was engraved with a pattern of a roaring tiger. It was unknown what material it was made of, but under the sunlight, it reflected a colorful light. Upon seeing this familiar badge, Earl Nickel was stunned. He looked at the Earl of Avon in disbelief and asked in a trembling voice, "What? Mata? Colorful tiger? Your Excellency, where did you get this badge?" The Earl of Avon smiled and said, "Of course Mr. Feng gave it to me." "Mr. Feng?" Earl Nickel was pleasantly surprised and somewhat in disbelief. "Didn't he die at the hands of Prince Rhy? You believe such a rumor?" The Earl of Avon asked rhetorically. "If so, how could Prince Rhy be reduced to such a state? Who is the person he is tracking all over the world?" Earl Nickel suppressed his excitement and asked in a low voice, "What agreement have you reached with Mr. Feng?" The Earl of Avon smiled reservedly and said, "I will marry Mr. Feng's daughter, and Mr. Feng will help me control the eastern region." "Daughter?" Earl Nickel was puzzled. "Aren't you already engaged to Grace of the Brugen family?" The Earl of Avon smiled mysteriously and said, "You will understand in the future. Now, do you think that compared to my mother, I am a better partner for the Nickel family?" Earl Nickel's gaze was fixed on the colorful tiger badge in the Earl of Avon's hand. He nodded and said, "Yes. If you have reached an agreement with Mr. Feng, then the Nickel family is naturally willing to follow in your footsteps." "Very good," Count Elvin said mysteriously as he put away the badge with a smug smile. "Earl Nickel, White Dew City will be especially lively tonight. Please wait and see." Chapter 481. Prince Harrison, Princess Judy, Count Angeli, welcome to the White Dew Castle. In front of the White Dew Castle, the Duchess, who was dressed to the nines, had an impeccable smile on her face as she welcomed the guests. It was as if she had completely forgotten that this guest had just led an army to attack the White Dew Castle and killed her husband. Colin jumped off his horse and walked to the Duchess with a smile on his face. "This is my first visit, so I didn't prepare any expensive gifts. I hope you don't mind." Colin clapped his hands as he spoke, and the 4 guards behind him immediately carried a coffin forward. It was needless to say whose body was in the coffin. The atmosphere suddenly changed, and the air became so stagnant that it was almost suffocating. The people of the House of St. Prospero were spitting fire from their eyes. If looks could kill, then Colin would be riddled with holes by now. Unfortunately, gazes couldn't kill people. The people of the House of St. Prospero could only rage helplessly. The Duchess, on the other hand, had a calm expression, as if the body in the coffin was just a stranger's body. "Count Angeli, you're too kind. The House of St. Prospero will definitely remember such a valuable gift." Colin raised his eyebrows. For a moment, he didn't want to continue provoking her. Otherwise, it would feel like he was bullying a widow. He glanced at the people behind the Duchess and asked in confusion, "Why don't I see Marquis Vincent?" "Vincent was severely injured and is still unconscious. That's why he couldn't come and greet you." "Severely injured and unconscious." Colin blinked his eyes. I want to visit the Marquis. Is it convenient for you?" As soon as these words were spoken, the people of the House of St. Prospero started breathing heavily. They obviously thought that Colin's hypocrisy was a provocation. The Duchess' expression also became gloomy. She said coldly, "I'm sorry, Count Angeli. I appreciate your kindness. However, it's not convenient for Vincent to see outsiders right now. When he recovers, it won't be too late to see you." After all, he was in someone else's territory. Colin didn't want to be too arrogant, so he nodded. "All right." The Duchess turned to the side and extended her hand in an inviting gesture. "Please come in, 3 distinguished guests. We have already prepared a room for you. Please rest first." There will be a grand welcome banquet tonight. Colin nodded and strode into White Dew Castle, as if there was no one around while he faced the undisguised hostile gazes. Prince Harrison and Princess Judy also followed. Under the guidance of the maid, Colin walked into his room. The overall architectural style of White Dew Castle was exquisite and elegant. The main body was built with carefully cut white glazed rock. The ground and walls were suffused with a faint layer of beige. Jadeite, rubies, and sapphires could be seen everywhere in the room. One could even see sparkling and translucent diamonds inlaid in conspicuous places. There were many oil paintings of different styles, and some animal head specimens hanging on the wall. Colin didn't have the ability to appreciate art, so he didn't pay attention to them after a glance. "Sir, do you need me to help you bathe and change your clothes?" the young maid asked with a red face. "No need. I'll do it myself. You can leave." After rejecting the maid's good intentions, Colin took off his armor and went to the bathroom alone. Warm water had already been prepared in the bathtub, and there was a faint fragrance of jasmine. He didn't know where the house of Saint Prospero had gotten the jasmine flowers in the middle of winter. Colin slowly sat in the bathtub and felt the warm water soak into every inch of his skin. He closed his eyes comfortably. However, his mind didn't stop. Colin definitely didn't believe the Duchess when she said that Marquis Vincent was seriously injured and unconscious. After all, as a blood descendant he had transformed into, unless Marquis Vincent's head was chopped off, any kind of injury would only be a scratch to him. How could he be seriously injured and unconscious? He couldn't be pretending to be dead, right? And he didn't even come out to welcome him when he arrived at White Dew Castle. Hee. Colin had started to be vigilant when he saw the blood slaves voluntarily leaving food for their family in the small village outside of Linshui City. If a blood slave without self-awareness would unconsciously feel pity for their family, then what about a blood descendant with self-awareness? A blood descendant with self-awareness would be able to consider the pros and cons, and weigh the pros and cons. Then, when a blood descendant found that the benefits of betrayal were far greater than loyalty, would he still choose loyalty? This was especially obvious with Marquis Vincent. Marquis Vincent obeyed Colin's words before, perhaps because he was a blood descendant, but perhaps because he needed Colin's help at that time. Without Colin, he would only be a pitiful worm abandoned by his father and framed by his younger brother. But now, Colin had already helped him clear all obstacles, and the position of Duke of the Eastern Region was within his reach. Would Vincent still be willing to be Colin's servant and harm his own interests for him? Colin felt that it was unlikely. However, what was Marquis Vincent planning to do now? Was he going to pretend to be dead and deliberately not cooperate with Colin's next move? Was he going to wait until the Blood Cavalry had no choice but to withdraw from the Eastern Region because of the war order before he came out to succeed the position of Duke of the Eastern Region? Or was this guy already planning a more vicious plan to get rid of him once and for all, and regain his freedom? The more Colin thought about it, the more he felt that the latter was more likely. The corners of his mouth gradually drew an arc, as if he felt that the current situation was very interesting, and even began to look forward to Marquis Vincent's next performance. But at this moment, Colin suddenly smelled a faint smell of blood. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked around, but found nothing unusual in the bathroom. But Colin's vigilance did not weaken at all. After all, he had just guessed that Marquis Vincent might bite back. Could this be a trap that he had set for him? Thinking of this, Colin stood up from the bathtub, wiped the water droplets on his body with a bath towel, and put on his clothes again. Then he began to carefully identify the source of the smell of blood. But then, Colin found that the smell of blood was somewhat familiar, as if he had smelled it somewhere before. Walking into the bedroom, the smell of blood gradually became stronger, and Colin finally remembered that this was clearly the smell he had smelled in the underground blood pool in the Floral City. In the Schurz family's Swan Castle, there was also this smell. So, Earl Angeli. A deep and familiar voice sounded behind him. Colin's body stiffened, and the expression on his face became extremely complicated. He slowly turned around and looked at the familiar face that had appeared behind him at some point in time. He pulled out a stiff smile and said, "I'm sorry. Should I call you Duke of St. Hilda? Or Mr. Chapter 482. The name is not important. Mr. Chung smiled as he spoke. His attitude was so gentle that it was as if he was meeting an elder of his own family. Just like this body, it will only confuse mediocre people, but it will not fool smart people. Although he had long guessed that Mr. Chung might have used the corpse of the Duke of St. Hilda to play a reincarnation, when Colin really saw the resurrected Duke of St. Hilda with his own eyes and confirmed his previous guess, he could not help but be shocked. Even in this world of transcendence, such an unscientific thing was truly unbelievable. Was Arcana really so magical? Or was Mr. Chung just too resourceful? I didn't expect to see you in White Dew Castle. It's truly an honor. Colin greeted with a smile. Although he tried his best to remain calm, the smile on his face was inevitably a little stiff. To be honest, Mr. Chong's appearance was completely out of his expectations. And what he hated the most was accidents. This legendary figure who had stirred up the northern frontier twice by himself was not an easy character to deal with. Especially now, after Mr. Chung had taken over the body of a paladin, Colin really had no idea how terrifying his strength would be. If such a person stood on the opposite side of him, Colin would not naively think that Mr. Chong's appearance in White Dew City was just a coincidence. Obviously, Mr. Chung had a plan here as well, but he did not know if it would conflict with his plan. Count Angeli, this should be our first official meeting, right? Mr. Chung looked at Colin with interest and said with a sigh. Yes. I have long admired your great name, Colin said respectfully. At the same time, he kept guessing Mr. Chong's purpose in coming to White Dew City this time. Actually, I have wanted to meet you for a long time, Count Angeli. Among the rising stars of the Radiance Empire in the past 10 years, you are the most outstanding one. Mr. Chung smiled and looked at Colin, not hiding the admiration in his eyes. You flatter me. No, not at all. In fact, I feel that I have always underestimated you. The corner of Colin's mouth twitched awkwardly. He felt that Mr. Cheng's praise was a little awkward and made him very uncomfortable. Just as she was about to say something, she heard Mr. Kuei ask again. Count Angeli, you've reached rank 6, right? Colin could only nod honestly and say, yes, I was lucky enough to advance just now. What a young tier 6 knight. As far as I can remember, even the most talented paladins of the St. Thean family were not as powerful as you at your age. How can I be compared to my holy knight ancestors? No, Mr. Chung said seriously. You're even stronger than them. At least when they were your age, none of them could lead an army to attack White Dew City. Moreover, you can turn the eastern region upside down with only 20,000 bloody cavalrymen. Is it because you're too powerful? Or is it because the people of the eastern region have been living such a comfortable life for so long that the army has become so weak? The bad premonition in Colin's heart was getting stronger and stronger. His brain was spinning rapidly, thinking about the real purpose of Mr. Chung, and at the same time he responded. No, I was just lucky to win a few battles. Mr. Chung smiled and finally stopped praising Colin. Instead, he said, when we were in Swan Castle, Archbishop Ajani told you all the secrets of the church, right? Yes. Colin hurriedly nodded and said, I agree with Archbishop Ajani's point of view very much. Nowadays, the church is too depraved. In the name of the God of Light, they keep interfering in the affairs of the empire and plundering private interests. So when I heard that you and Archbishop Ajani were determined to change the current situation, I chose to join you without hesitation. This time, I led the army to attack the eastern region because I want to cut off the church's biggest support in the secular world. What are your plans for coming to White Dew City this time? In fact, Colin was also very clear that the alliance between him, Mr. Chung, and Archbishop Ajani was actually very fragile. Although both sides intended to resist the church, there was no basis of trust between them, and there was no clear goal or plan between them. There were even some old grudges and conflicts of interest between them. Colin did not think that Mr. Chung would forget that he had repeatedly foiled his plans. It could even be said that the failure of the St. Thean family to successfully occupy the northern frontier was mostly due to Colin. Now he only hoped that Mr. Chung could temporarily put aside the grudges between them for the sake of the foundation of cooperation between them, and unite to cut off the church's tentacles in the eastern region. Mr. Chung did not answer Colin's question, but said to himself, "Count Angeli, in fact, I have always admired you, and I also very much hope to become your ally." Colin's heart sank, because he understood that generally, there would be a but at the end of this sentence pattern. And all the words he said before this but were all bullshit. Sure enough, he heard Mr. Chung continue. "But, you are too outstanding, so outstanding that it makes me tremble in fear." Colin pursed his lips and said helplessly, "Mr. Chung, isn't it a good thing to have an outstanding ally?" "It may be for some people, but not for me." Mr. Chung stared into Colin's eyes, and there was a hint of regret in his eyes. "I am a person with a strong desire for control, so I don't like those who are too outstanding, and always bring me surprises and surprises." Colin's muscles instantly tightened, and he prepared for the worst, but he still tried to persuade him. "Mr. Chung, you have overestimated me. I am just the son of a baron in the countryside. Even if I become a count, it is because of the shadow of the house of St. Hilda." "No," Mr. Chung interrupted, and the smile on his face disappeared. "Count Angeli, I have carefully investigated your past, and to be honest, I have a guilty conscience. If I give you more time, I don't even dare to imagine how far you will go. So I am sorry." Hearing this, Colin no longer had any hope in his heart. His whole body surged like flowing water, and the holy light gathered in his hands. But before he could make a move, he saw Mr. Cheng's eyes suddenly emit a dazzling light. For a moment, he felt like he saw the sun right in front of him. His eyes stung, and tears flowed out uncontrollably. Colin was shocked, and he immediately retreated. But in his blurred vision, he saw an arm shining with golden holy light, thrusting straight into his chest with the force of a thunderbolt. "Poochie!" Colin screamed, and he was shocked to find that his heart was already in Mr. Cheng's hand. "Farewell, Count Angeli." Bang! Mr. Cheng squeezed hard, and Colin's heart burst like a balloon filled with water. Blood splattered everywhere. Chapter 483. When Prince Harrison walked out of the bathroom, a maid hurriedly came forward to help him wipe off the water droplets. Having grown up in Phoenix Palace, Prince Harrison had long been used to being served by maids. He wouldn't be as pretentious as Colin. Of course, he wouldn't do anything ambiguous to a maid. As a prince, he wasn't that desperate. After putting on his formal attire, Prince Harrison let the maid apply perfume on him. "What time is the banquet?" "I'll go ask for you." "Okay." After the maid left, Prince Harrison looked in the mirror and adjusted his formal attire. After a moment, he finally revealed a satisfied smile. But just as he was about to turn around, Prince Harrison was shocked to find that there was an additional figure in the mirror. However, after seeing that person's face clearly, Prince Harrison immediately let out a sigh of relief. He turned around and asked, "Uncle RHY, why are you in White Dew City?" Prince Harrison actually wasn't afraid of Prince RHY. Although everyone believed that this person had committed a heinous crime by brazenly killing a consul of the empire, Prince Harrison had accidentally overheard a conversation between his parents and knew that Prince RHY had been wronged. Therefore, Prince Harrison actually felt a trace of guilt and sympathy towards this uncle of his. Prince RHY sat down at the table, picked up the teapot, and poured himself a cup of flower tea. "I'm chasing after someone. Didn't you go to Silvermoon City? Why are you here?" "I'm following my teacher here." "You still don't know, but my teacher is amazing. He led a mere 20,000 bloody cavalry and defeated the entire Eastern Army. If not for my father's war order being passed to White Dew City, I'm afraid this city would have fallen again." Prince Harrison used an incomparably proud tone to praise his teacher's glorious achievements. Only then did he notice the first sentence that Prince RHY had just said. "Uncle RHY, you said that you're chasing after someone? Who are you chasing after?" Prince RHY took a sip of tea and said indifferently, "The person who set me up." Prince Harrison's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately became nervous. Because Prince Harrison did not know the whole truth, Nor did he know Mr. Castle's role in this matter. When he heard Prince Leahy say that he was tracking down the people who had framed him, he mistakenly thought that he was referring to Emperor Reinhardt and Empress Medela. Prince Harrison's strange behavior naturally couldn't escape Prince Rhy's eyes. "Harrison, do you know something?" "Uncle, I... Prince Harrison panicked under Prince Lacy's sharp gaze. Of course, this made Prince Rhy even more certain that his nephew obviously knew some inside information. Thus, he stood up and walked in front of Prince Harrison. He placed a hand on Prince Harrison's shoulder and bowed slightly. "Harrison, tell me what you know." Prince Harrison felt as if the hand on his shoulder had grabbed his soul, and a shudder that originated from the depths of his heart swept through his entire body. But he still clenched his teeth and said resolutely, "Uncle, I can't betray father and mother." Prince Rhy had a mocking expression. "Your willpower is not bad, but it's a pity you used it in the wrong place. Has the San Lorenzo family fallen to the point where they have to rely on schemes to maintain their rule?" Prince Harrison's entire body trembled, and sweat poured down like rain, but he still stubbornly kept his mouth shut. Prince Rhy's expression became colder and colder. "Your father has already disgraced the glory of the San Lorenzo family. I didn't expect you to be the same kind of person. Sooner or later, the prestige of the royal family will be completely destroyed by you and your father. No, I can't allow such a thing to happen." Prince Rhy's eyes revealed an undisguised killing intent as he continued. "Harrison, I'll give you one last chance. Die despicably or live honorably. Choose for yourself." Prince Harrison felt the hand on his shoulder clench tighter and tighter, as if it was going to crush his body. This young prince was facing a choice between life and death for the first time, and he never expected that the person who would force him into a corner would be his own uncle. Something in his heart seemed to crumble and shatter at this moment. Prince Harrison suddenly thought of something his mother, Empress Medela, had said to him. A king is destined to be lonely, and also destined to be surrounded by lies and betrayals. Even your closest kin might not be trustworthy. You can only rely on yourself. Prince Harrison had always felt that his mother's words were a little too frightening, but now, facing his murderous uncle, he suddenly came to a realization. "Yes, uncle. You were framed." Prince Harrison used all his strength to growl. Prince Rhy's expression softened, but he still continued to ask, "Who framed me?" "It was father and mother." "How did they frame you?" "I really don't know. I just happened to overhear a few words of their conversation, and guessed that you were innocent. As for how they framed you, I really don't know." Prince Rhy stared into Prince Harrison's eyes. After a while, he seemed to have finally confirmed that Prince Harrison was not lying. "Then, are you willing to share what you know with the public?" Prince Harrison hesitated for a moment, but then gritted his teeth and nodded. Only then did Prince Lacy retract his fierce aura and smile. "Very good. That was what a righteous San Lorenzo should do. I will contact His Holiness to arrange a hearing. At that time you..." At this point, Prince Rhy suddenly paused. This was because he had sensed an intense wave of holy light erupting nearby. In a moment of desperation, Prince Rhy immediately threw Prince Harrison aside and disappeared from the room in a flash. Prince Harrison collapsed onto the ground, panting heavily. He couldn't muster any strength at all. After a long while, he finally struggled to get up, found a pen and paper, and quickly wrote a letter with trembling hands. Men. A maid pushed the door open and entered. "Your Highness, what orders do you have?" Prince Harrison handed the letter over and said, "Send this letter to Imperial Dragon City immediately." "Yes." The maid nodded, but after seeing Prince Harrison's sorry state, she carefully asked, "Your Highness, do you need me to prepare a new set of clothes for you?" "Yes." On the other side, Prince Rhy rushed into Colin's room after chasing the source of the holy light, only to find that Colin was lying in a pool of blood. After carefully sensing the remaining energy waves in the air, Prince Rhy's eyes suddenly became extremely fierce. "Who are you?" The guards of the House of Saint Prospero finally arrived, and shouted at Prince Rhy's back. Prince Rhy, of course, did not care about these guards. He jumped out of the open window without looking back. Only then did the guards notice Colin lying in a pool of blood. They were immediately scared out of their wits. Quick! Get a priest! Count Angeli was assassinated. That you're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.